I never believed in karma until I saw her walk through those glass doors. 10 years. 10 years since I'd last seen Vanessa Mitchell's perfectly made-up face. 10 years since she'd turned my high school existence into a living nightmare. And now here she was, clutching a resume in manicured hands, completely unaware that the Morgan she had an interview with was none other than Eleanor Morgan, the same smelly Ellie she'd tormented relentlessly throughout 4 years at Westlake High. My heart hammered against my ribs as I watched her through the glass wall of my office. She was speaking to my assistant, all bright smiles and confident posture. Still beautiful, still polished, still radiating that effortless superiority that had made her the undisputed queen of Westlake, while simultaneously making me wish the ground would swallow me whole. An unexpected chill crawled up my spine as memories I'd spent years burying came rushing back. The accidental spills on my clothes before important presentations, the whispers that followed me down hallways, the fake invitations to parties where no one expected me to actually show up, the carefully orchestrated public humiliations. And worst of all, the incident at senior prom, the night I finally understood that some wounds don't heal, they just scab over, waiting to be torn open again. Ms. Morgan, your 10 o'clock is here. My assistant's voice crackled through the intercom, pulling me back to the present. I smoothed my tailored blazer, adjusted my glasses, and took a calming breath. Sent her in. The woman who walked into my office was both exactly the same and completely different from the girl who had terrorized me. Her blonde hair was shorter now, cut into a sleek bob that framed her heart-shaped face. The designer clothes had been traded for a conservative but undoubtedly expensive interview suit. But that smile, that perfectly practiced smile that never quite reached her eyes, that hadn't changed at all. "Thank you so much for meeting with me," she said, extending her hand. "I'm Vanessa Mitchell." I allowed myself one moment of satisfaction as I noticed the slight tremor in her fingers. She needed this job. The marketing director position at Morgan Media Group was highly coveted, and from what my brief research had told me, Vanessa was coming off a spectacular failure at her previous firm. A failure that had left her reputation in tatters and her options limited. "Please have a seat." I gestured to the chair across from my desk, my voice betraying nothing of the emotional storm brewing inside me. She didn't recognize me. Not even a flicker of familiarity crossed her face as she sat down, crossing her legs and placing her portfolio on her lap. Why would she? In high school, I'd been invisible except when she needed a target. The awkward, overweight scholarship student with thrift store clothes and a single mother who worked 2 jobs. Now I was 30 pounds lighter, wearing designer clothes of my own, with contact lenses instead of the thick glasses she used to mock. My frizzy hair had been tamed into sophisticated waves, and the executive office we sat in screamed success in a language Vanessa understood all too well. I was no longer someone to be ridiculed. I was someone to impress. "Your resume is quite impressive," I said, flipping through the pages of her application. "Though I see there was a gap between your position at Archer and Rome and this interview." A flash of discomfort crossed her face before her professional mask slipped back into place. "Yes, I took some time to reassess my career direction after leaving Archer. I wanted to be sure my next move aligned with my long-term goals." That was a polished way of saying she'd been fired and couldn't find another job. I'd done my homework. Vanessa had risen quickly at Archer and Rome, burning bridges and stepping on colleagues on her way up, the same tactics that had made her high school royalty. But corporate politics were a different beast, and eventually, her methods had backfired spectacularly. A major client had walked, taking millions in business with them, and Vanessa had taken the fall. "And what are those goals exactly?" I asked, leaning back in my chair. As she launched into a perfectly rehearsed answer about growth, innovation, and leadership, my mind drifted to the last time I'd heard her voice. Senior year. April 14th, the day she'd orchestrated my complete humiliation in front of the entire student body. I'd finally been finding my footing that year. My mother's promotion had meant new clothes. A supportive English teacher had helped build my confidence. I'd even been asked to prom by David Chen, a quiet boy from my advanced placement classes who shared my love of classic literature. For one brief, shining moment, I thought I might escape high school with some dignity intact. Until Vanessa decided that my small happiness was an offense to the natural order. "And that's why I believe my experience makes me perfect for this position," Vanessa concluded, pulling me back to the present. I nodded thoughtfully, as though considering her words. Tell me about a time you faced a significant challenge in your professional life and how you overcame it. The interview questions continued, each designed to probe at the weaknesses I already knew existed. With each response, I could see Vanessa growing more confident. She thought it was going well. She thought she had me charmed, just like she'd charmed every authority figure at Westlake while terrorizing those beneath her in the social hierarchy. "One last question, Miss Mitchell," I said as the interview drew to a close. "Do you believe in second chances?" Something in my tone must have triggered a warning bell, because for the first time since she'd entered my office, Vanessa truly looked at me. Her eyes narrowed slightly, searching my face. Yes, of course. Everyone deserves the opportunity to learn and grow from their mistakes. I smiled. Not the professional smile I'd maintained throughout our meeting, but a smaller, colder one that I couldn't quite suppress. Fascinating. I've always found that perspective intriguing, I said, closing her file. "Well, Ms. Mitchell, thank you for coming in today. HR will be in touch within the week regarding our decision." Relief flooded her features as she stood, gathering her portfolio. "Thank you so much for your time, Ms. Morgan. I'm very excited about the possibility of joining your team." As I watched her walk out of my office, a strange calm settled over me. 10 years ago, I would have given anything for Vanessa Mitchell to look at me the way she just had, with respect, even a hint of deference. Now, I felt nothing but a hollow ache where my rage had lived for so long. I hadn't decided what to do yet. Part of me wanted to reject her application immediately, to send her away with the same casual cruelty she'd once shown me. But another part, a part I didn't quite recognize, wanted something else. Something that would take more time, more planning. I picked up my phone. "Sarah, please ask HR to move forward with MS Mitchell's application. I'd like to schedule a second interview." That night I couldn't sleep. I paced my apartment, moving from the floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the city to the sleek kitchen island where a glass of wine sat untouched. My mind was a battlefield of competing thoughts. Was I really considering hiring Vanessa? The rational part of me, the part that had built Morgan Media from a small digital marketing startup to a respected agency with blue-chip clients, knew it was a terrible idea. Vanessa's record showed talent, but also instability, entitlement, and a tendency to create toxic work environments, all liabilities I couldn't afford. But the wounded 16-year-old girl inside me saw an opportunity that might never come again. I pulled out my laptop and found myself typing Vanessa Mitchell into the search bar. Social media accounts appeared, carefully curated images of a successful life, vacation photos in tropical locations, professional headshots with confident smiles, nothing revealing the desperation I'd glimpsed beneath her polished exterior today. I clicked through to her Instagram and scrolled back, until familiar faces began to appear. Our high school classmates. The same people who had stood by and watched as Vanessa systematically destroyed any chance I had at a normal teenage experience. There it was. A reunion photo from 2 years ago. "Westlake High forever. Class of 2011 Queen Bees." The caption made my stomach turn. Vanessa stood in the center, surrounded by her former court of willing accomplices. They all looked successful, happy, utterly untroubled by the pain they'd caused. I closed the laptop more forcefully than necessary and moved to the windows again. The city sparkled below, millions of lives unfolding in lighted windows and moving cars. Somewhere out there, Vanessa was probably celebrating what she perceived as a successful interview. Meanwhile, I was here, successful by any objective measure, yet still haunted by the insecurities she'd planted so many years ago. "This is pathetic," I said aloud to my empty apartment. "She's just a job applicant. Treat her like any other." But she wasn't any other applicant. She was Vanessa Mitchell, the girl who had read my private journal entries to the entire cafeteria, the girl who had started the rumor that I only got into honors classes because my mother was sleeping with the principal, the girl who had convinced David Chen that asking me to prom had been a cruel joke all along. The memory of prom night hit me with unexpected force. I'd spent weeks preparing, saving up for a dress, learning to apply makeup from YouTube tutorials, allowing myself to believe that perhaps I could have one normal high school experience before graduation. I'd been waiting for David outside the gym, heart pounding with anticipation, when Vanessa appeared instead. "Oh, Ellie," she'd said, mock concern dripping from her voice. "Did you really think David was going to take you? That's adorable." While I stood frozen, she'd explained how it had been a bet all along. $20 to see if he could convince the school charity case, that someone might actually want to date her. As she spoke, her friends recorded my reaction on their phones. By Monday morning, my tears would be all over social media. I'd run home that night and sworn I would never give anyone that kind of power over me again. I'd changed schools for the last month of senior year, graduated quietly, and left for college without looking back. Until today. My phone buzzed with a text from Sarah, my assistant. HR has scheduled Mitchell for second interview on Thursday at 2 p.m. Need anything else before tomorrow? I stared at the message, a plan beginning to crystallize in my mind. 10 years ago, Vanessa had taught me a painful lesson about power, who had it, who didn't, and how quickly it could be used to destroy. Now I had the power. The question was, what kind of person had I become in the decades since she'd broken me? Would I be satisfied with simply rejecting her application, delivering a single moment of retribution? Or did I want something more, lasting? I texted Sarah back, "That's perfect. Also, please clear my schedule for lunch with Mez. Mitchell following the interview. I'd like to get to know her better." Sleep came easier after that, my dreams filled with boardrooms and high school hallways that somehow merged into the same long corridor. The week passed in a blur of meetings and deadlines, but beneath my professional focus ran a current of anticipation. I found myself researching Vanessa more thoroughly, not just her professional background, but her personal life as well. Social media painted a picture of someone whose carefully constructed facade was beginning to crack. Between the glamorous posts were hints of trouble, cryptic quotes about betrayal, vague references to new beginnings. Her LinkedIn connections had dwindled in the months since her departure from Archer and Rome. Former colleagues had quietly distanced themselves. The more I learned, the clearer it became that Vanessa was not just looking for a job, she was looking for salvation. Morgan Media could restore her professional reputation. The salary would help with what appeared to be mounting financial problems. She needed this far more than I'd initially realized. By Thursday morning, I had made my decision. I wouldn't turn her away. I would hire her. And then I would make her earn every penny in ways she couldn't begin to imagine. The second interview went even better than the first. Vanessa arrived 15 minutes early, armed with a comprehensive analysis of our recent campaigns and detailed suggestions for improvement. Some of her ideas were actually quite good, which only strengthened my resolve. She had talent that I could use, even as I taught her exactly how it felt to be under someone else's thumb. "These are impressive insights," I said, closing the folder she'd presented. "I especially appreciate your thoughts on our millennial engagement strategy." Vanessa beamed, a genuine smile breaking through her professional demeanor. "Thank you. I've always been passionate about understanding generational marketing differences." "Well, I think we've seen enough," I said, standing up. "If you're available, I'd like to continue this conversation over lunch. There's a nice bistro around the corner." Her surprise was evident but quickly masked by pleasure. "I'd love that." The restaurant was quiet and upscale, white tablecloths, attentive service, and enough privacy to speak freely. I ordered for both of us, a small power move that Vanessa seemed to accept without question. She was eager to please, hanging on my every word as I discussed the company's vision and the role I envisioned for her. "So," I said, after our meals arrived and pleasantries had been exchanged, "tell me something that's not on your resume, Vanessa. What drives you?" She hesitated, weighing her answer. I could almost see her calculating which response would most impress me. "I've always been motivated by excellence," she said finally. "Setting high standards and meeting them, leading by example." I nodded, taking a sip of water. "And when you fall short of those standards? What happened at Archer and Rome, for instance?" The question was direct, more direct than appropriate for a business lunch, but I watched with interest as Vanessa navigated the uncomfortable moment. "That was a difficult learning experience," she said carefully. "I took risks that didn't pay off, and ultimately, I had to take responsibility for those decisions." I murmured non-committally. "Taking responsibility is important. Do you find that easy or difficult?" She looked momentarily confused by the philosophical turn. I think it's necessary, regardless of difficulty." "I agree," I said, leaning slightly forward. "I've always believed that we must face the consequences of our actions, no matter how much time has passed." "Don't you think?" Something flickered in her eyes, a brief uncertainty before she nodded. "Of course." I changed the subject then, steering the conversation to safer professional topics. By the time dessert arrived, Vanessa had relaxed again, clearly believing the lunch was going well. Which it was, just not for the reasons she thought. "I have to say, Vanessa, I'm impressed. I said as I signaled for the check. "I think you could be a valuable addition to our team." Her face lit up with barely contained excitement. "Really? I mean, I would be honored to join Morgan Media. There would be a 3-month probationary period, of course. Standard procedure for all new executives." "Of course, absolutely," she agreed quickly. I smiled, signing the check the waiter had placed discreetly at my elbow. "Then consider this a formal offer. HR will send over the paperwork tomorrow. You'd start next Monday." The relief that flooded her features was almost painful to witness. For a moment, I felt a twinge of something like guilt. Was I really going to go through with this? Then I remembered prom night, the public reading of my journal, the countless small humiliations that had shaped my adolescence. The coldness crystallized around my heart once more. "Thank you so much, Ms. Morgan. You won't regret this decision." "I'm sure I won't," I replied smoothly. "And please call me Ellie." The name hung in the air between us. I watched her face carefully, searching for any sign of recognition. There was none, not even the slightest hint that she connected Ellie Morgan with Smelly Ellie. From Westlake High, it was both disappointing and perfect. Disappointing that I remained so forgettable to someone who had loomed so large in my life. Perfect because it meant my plan could proceed exactly as I'd envisioned. "Ellie?" she repeated with a smile. "Thank you again. I can't wait to get started." As we walked back toward the office, I allowed myself to imagine the coming months. The slow, careful dismantling of Vanessa Mitchell's confidence. The strategic challenges that would push her to her limits. The subtle reminders of her past failures. And eventually, when the time was right, the revelation of exactly who she was working for. It wouldn't be quick or dramatic. Real revenge, I was beginning to understand, required patience. But I had waited 10 years already. I could wait a little longer to ensure that justice, my version of it anyway, was perfectly served. Vanessa's first day at Morgan Media arrived with picture-perfect weather, sunshine streaming through the office windows, casting golden rectangles across the sleek hardwood floors of our reception area. I watched from my office as she was escorted through the security protocols, her expression a mixture of anxiety and determination. She wore a crimson blazer over a cream blouse, her signature power color from high school now repurposed for corporate battle. I'd spent the weekend preparing, not just professionally, but emotionally. Part of me still couldn't believe I was actually going through with this elaborate plan. The rational executive voice in my head listed all the ways this could backfire. Lost productivity, potential legal issues if things went sideways, the simple distraction of personal vendetta in a business that required my full attention. But that voice was increasingly drowned out by a deeper, more visceral need to see this through. I had arranged for Vanessa to report directly to me, bypassing the usual departmental structure. "I want to personally mentor our new marketing director," I'd told the executive team, spinning it as both a vote of confidence in her abilities and a hands-on approach to integrating a senior hire. No one questioned it. After all, I'd built this company on unconventional decisions that ultimately proved correct. "Your office is all set up," I said, greeting Vanessa in the hallway before her orientation could begin. "I hope you don't mind, but I've scheduled you for a full client presentation on Wednesday." Her eyes widened slightly. "This Wednesday? As in 2 days from now?" I nodded, maintaining an expression of complete confidence in her abilities. "The Hextron account. They're considering expanding their campaign, and I think your fresh perspective would be valuable." I handed her a thumb drive. "Here's all the background material. Their CMO can be a bit demanding, but I'm sure you'll handle it beautifully." "Of course," she said, recovering quickly. "I'll be ready." "Excellent. We'll meet tomorrow afternoon to review your presentation." I smiled encouragingly. It's a bit of a baptism by fire, but I've found that's the best way to integrate new team members. As I walked away, I could feel her anxiety radiating like heat. The Hextron account was our most profitable and most challenging client. Their CMO, Richard Barnes, was notorious for eviscerating unprepared presenters. Under normal circumstances, I would never throw a new hire into such a situation, but these weren't normal circumstances. The day proceeded with Vanessa caught in a whirlwind of orientation meetings, introductions, and IT setups, all while the Hextron deadline loomed. I'd instructed her assistant to schedule additional urgent matters that would further fragment her preparation time. By evening, when most of the staff had gone home, I saw the lights still on in her new office. Through the glass walls, I could see her hunched over her computer, surrounded by notes and coffee cups. She looked up as I passed, offering a determined smile that I returned with a cheerful wave. Don't stay too late, I called. First days are always exhausting. Just getting a handle on things, she replied, her voice steady despite the obvious fatigue. I nodded approvingly. That's the kind of dedication we value here. See you tomorrow. As I rode the elevator down to the parking garage, I reflected on the day's observations. Vanessa was clearly thrown by the immediate high-stakes assignment, but she hadn't complained or made excuses. She'd accepted the challenge with the same confidence she'd always projected. Perhaps that's what had made her such an effective tormentor in high school, that unshakable belief in her own exceptionalism. It would make breaking her all the more satisfying. The next day, Vanessa arrived early, dark circles under her eyes partially concealed by skillful makeup. Her presentation draft was competent but rushed, exactly what you'd expect from someone talented working under impossible constraints. This is a good start, I said after reviewing her slides, my tone carefully balanced between encouragement and critique. But Hextron expects more innovation than this. These concepts feel derivative of their existing campaign. Frustration flickered across her face before she masked it. I was trying to maintain brand consistency while introducing new elements. Of course, I nodded. But Richard responds to bold thinking. He wants to be challenged, not comforted. I made several notes on her printout. I'd suggest completely reworking the central concept. Maybe something that ties into their upcoming product launch? The one in Q4? She asked, confusion evident. I didn't see anything about that in the materials. I feigned surprise. It wasn't in the brief? I'm so sorry, that's a significant oversight. I'll have Sarah send over the confidential product roadmap right away. You'll want to incorporate that throughout. The color drained slightly from Vanessa's face as she realized she would essentially need to start over with less than 24 hours remaining. Will that be a problem? I asked innocently. She straightened her shoulders. Not at all. I'll have a revised presentation ready by morning. Perfect. Why don't we meet at 8 a.m. to review the changes? The meeting with Hextron is at 10. As predicted, Vanessa worked through the night. Security logs showed she never left the building. When we met the next morning, she was running on caffeine and determination, her revised presentation substantially stronger despite the constraints. Much better, I said after she walked me through the new concept. Her face fell. The visual direction feels misaligned with where they're heading in the Asian markets. Did you reference the Tokyo focus group results? I don't think those were included in what Sarah sent over. I sighed, glancing at my watch. We don't have time to incorporate them now. You'll just have to acknowledge the limitation if Richard brings it up. I closed my laptop. Don't worry, I'll be in the meeting to support you if needed. The Hextron presentation went exactly as I'd orchestrated. Vanessa was eloquent but underprepared. Richard was demanding but not unreasonable. And I was supportive while subtly highlighting the gaps in her approach. What Vanessa means, I interjected at one particularly tense moment, is that while this initial concept doesn't address the Asian market considerations, we're prepared to develop a parallel strategy once we've established the core direction. Richard nodded, somewhat appeased. As long as we're not approaching this with Western-centric assumptions like last quarter. Absolutely not, Vanessa agreed quickly, shooting me a grateful look. By the meeting's end, we'd secured tentative approval to move forward, contingent on addressing Richard's concerns in a revised proposal. Not a disaster, but far from the triumphant new hire success that would have cemented Vanessa's position. Not bad for your first client presentation, I told her as we rode the elevator back to our floor. Richard can be brutal, but you held your ground. Thank you for stepping in, she said, a note of humility in her voice that I'd never heard during our high school years. I feel like I was working with incomplete information. I offered an apologetic smile. Growing pains. Every organization has its communication challenges. I'm confident you'll find your footing quickly. The pattern continued through Vanessa's first month. I assigned high-visibility projects with impossible deadlines. I provided critical information just late enough to create scrambling, but not so late that failure was inevitable. I positioned her to work with the most demanding clients and the most challenging team members. Through it all, Vanessa demonstrated a resilience I hadn't expected. She worked longer hours than anyone else. She adapted quickly. She even developed allies among the staff, her natural charisma earning her supporters despite the difficult circumstances. It was both impressive and infuriating. I'd expected her to crumble under pressure, to reveal the entitled, petulant bully beneath the professional veneer. Instead, she showed a determination that almost earned my grudging respect. But I wasn't about to be deterred by a target more resilient than anticipated. I simply needed to adjust my approach. The opportunity came with the annual Client Appreciation event, a lavish affair held at the Grand Meridian Hotel that showcased our agency's creative capabilities while thanking clients for their business. Planning this event was typically assigned to a team, but I gave sole responsibility to Vanessa. "I want you to make this your signature achievement," I told her. "A chance to really show what you can do when given full creative control." Her eyes lit up at the opportunity. "Thank you, Ellie. I won't let you down." "I know you won't," I replied, my smile concealing darker intentions. "Just one thing. We need to keep the budget under $100,000 this year. Economic uncertainty and all that." What I didn't tell her was that last year's event had cost nearly $250,000, and clients had come to expect that level of extravagance. The budget constraint would force impossible choices that would inevitably disappoint either the clients or the executive team, or both. As Vanessa threw herself into event planning, I executed the next phase of my plan: subtle social undermining. In meetings, I began questioning her decisions in ways that planted seeds of doubt without outright criticism. "Interesting choice," I would say, my tone making clear it wasn't a compliment. Or, "That's certainly one approach we could take," implying better options existed. I scheduled one-on-one lunches with key team members where I carefully expressed concerns about Vanessa's strategic thinking. Nothing concrete enough to constitute formal criticism, just enough to create an undercurrent of uncertainty about her capabilities. The whispers began to circulate. Vanessa's initial honeymoon period with the staff cooled as my subtle campaign took effect. I observed her becoming more isolated, eating lunch alone at her desk instead of in the communal area, spending more time closed in her office rather than collaborating in open spaces. The parallels to high school were impossible to ignore. Once again, I was watching Vanessa's social standing erode, but this time I was the one orchestrating her isolation. The irony wasn't lost on me, nor was the uncomfortable question of whether I was becoming exactly what I had once despised. I pushed those thoughts aside. This wasn't petty bullying. This was justice long delayed, wasn't it? 6 weeks into Vanessa's employment, I called her into my office for her preliminary performance review. She entered with visible apprehension, her usual confidence dimmed. "Please sit." I gestured to the chair across from my desk. "I wanted to check in on how you're feeling about your integration into the team." Vanessa chose her words carefully. "It's been challenging but rewarding. I appreciate being trusted with significant responsibilities right away. And the client appreciation event planning? How's that progressing?" A flicker of stress crossed her face. "I've developed 3 possible concepts within the budget constraints. I'm ready to present them whenever you'd like." "Perfect. Let's schedule that for tomorrow morning with the executive team." I leaned forward, adopting a concerned expression. "Vanessa, I hope you know that I have high expectations because I see tremendous potential in you." "Thank you," she said, visible relief softening her features. "That means a lot." However, I continued, my tone cooling slightly, "I've noticed some integration issues with the broader team. Several people have expressed concerns about collaboration difficulties." Her expression fell. "Really? I wasn't aware of any problems. Who specifically has concerns? I'd like to address them directly." I waved my hand dismissively. "That's not important right now. What matters is perception. In a leadership role, how others perceive you is often as important as the actual quality of your work." The words echoed across time, almost exactly what Vanessa had told me in high school after orchestrating my exclusion from a group project, leaving me to complete the assignment alone while receiving a shared grade. "Of course." She nodded, though confusion and hurt were evident in her eyes. "I'll work on improving team relationships." "Good. I'm confident this is just a temporary adjustment period." I smiled reassuringly. "By the way, have you had a chance to meet Jennifer from the creative department? I think you two might have attended the same high school." Vanessa looked momentarily startled. "Westlake High? I don't recall a Jennifer. Maybe I'm mistaken," I said lightly. "It just came up in conversation recently. Small world and all that." The seed was planted. Now Vanessa would wonder if someone at the company knew about her past. It was a small psychological weapon, but effective. I could already see the wheels turning behind her eyes. "If there's nothing else," she said, rising from her chair, "I should get back to finalizing those event concepts." "Of course. Looking forward to tomorrow's presentation." As she left my office, I felt a strange mixture of satisfaction and disquiet. The plan was working. Vanessa was off balance, isolated, and beginning to doubt herself. Yet watching her walk away, shoulders slightly hunched in a posture I recognized all too well from my own high school days, I couldn't help but wonder if this elaborate revenge was changing me in ways I hadn't anticipated. I pushed the thought aside. I was too far along to second-guess myself now. The client appreciation event became the perfect storm I'd engineered it to be. Vanessa's presentation to the executive team revealed the impossible trade-offs forced by the budget constraints. Either we significantly scaled back the experience from previous years, potentially disappointing clients, or we exceeded the budget I'd arbitrarily imposed. "These are all competent concepts," said Marcus, our CFO, after Vanessa finished presenting. "But they feel diminished from last year's event." "I agree," added Sophia, head of client relations. "The Astor Foundation expects a certain level of sophistication. This feels more corporate than creative." Vanessa maintained her composure, though I could see the strain around her eyes. "I completely understand your concerns. I've developed these concepts within the $100,000 budget parameter, but I'd be happy to present alternatives if there's flexibility on that constraint." All eyes turned to me. I allowed the silence to stretch uncomfortably before responding. "The budget reflects current business realities," I said finally. "However, perhaps there's room for creative solutions that achieve our objectives without additional spending." It was a non-answer that offered no real guidance, leaving Vanessa in exactly the same impossible position, but now with the added pressure of the entire executive team's disappointed expectations. "I'll develop some alternative approaches," she said, gathering her materials with steady hands despite the obvious tension. After the meeting, I stopped her in the hallway. "Don't be discouraged. First major presentations to the executive team are always challenging." "I could have been better prepared if I'd known the expectations up front," she replied, a hint of frustration breaking through her professional demeanor. I raised an eyebrow. "The expectations were clear. Create an exceptional client experience within budget constraints. That's the job." "But last year's event cost more than double what—" "Last year was last year," I interrupted smoothly. "Part of leadership is adapting to changing circumstances without excuses." The words hit their mark. Vanessa's mouth tightened, but she nodded. "You're right. I'll find a solution." And remarkably, she did. Over the next 2 weeks, Vanessa worked tirelessly, negotiating with vendors, calling in personal connections, and redesigning the entire event concept. She managed to create an experience that, while different from previous years, promised to be equally memorable through creativity rather than lavish spending. I watched her growing determination with mixed emotions. On one hand, her resilience was interfering with my plan to break her confidence. On the other, there was something almost admirable about her refusal to be defeated, a quality I hadn't given her credit for in our high school days. The day before the client event, Vanessa collapsed. She'd been working 18-hour days for weeks, skipping meals and surviving on caffeine. Her assistant found her unconscious at her desk and called an ambulance. I received the call while in a meeting with our largest client. "Ms. Mitchell has been taken to Metro General," my assistant informed me. "Apparent exhaustion and dehydration. They're keeping her overnight for observation." An unexpected wave of guilt washed over me. This wasn't what I'd intended. Professional humiliation, yes. Psychological discomfort, certainly. But physical collapse? That crossed a line I hadn't realized I'd drawn. "Thank you," I said, keeping my voice steady. "Please send flowers from the company and reschedule her meetings for the next 2 days." After my client departed, I sat alone in my office, confronting uncomfortable truths. I had driven Vanessa to physical collapse through deliberate manipulation. I had created working conditions designed to break her. I had become, in many ways, exactly the kind of person I had once despised. The realization should have been sobering, but instead it triggered a rush of conflicting emotions. Hadn't she deserved it? Hadn't she done worse to me, to others, without a moment's remorse? Why should I feel guilty for giving her a taste of her own medicine? Yet the fact remained, I did feel guilty. Not enough to abandon my plan entirely, but enough to recognize that some adjustments were necessary. Breaking Vanessa physically served no purpose. My goal had always been to make her understand, truly understand, what she had done to me all those years ago. I left the office early and drove to Metro General Hospital. Visiting hours were nearly over, but my substantial donation to their new cardiac wing the previous year granted me certain privileges. A nurse directed me to Vanessa's room without question. She looked smaller somehow, lying in the hospital bed with an IV in her arm. Her makeup had been removed, and without its protection, the dark circles under her eyes were pronounced against her pale skin. She turned as I entered, surprise registering on her face. "Ellie," she said, her voice hoarse, "I'm so sorry about this. The event is under control?" I interrupted, placing a small arrangement of flowers on her bedside table. "Your assistant has your notes, and the event planning team is executing everything according to your specifications." Relief flooded her features. "Thank you. I don't know what happened. I just felt dizzy and then—" "You pushed yourself too hard," I said, taking a seat beside her bed. "That's partly my responsibility. I set very challenging expectations for your first few months." Vanessa shook her head weakly. "No, you gave me opportunities to prove myself. I should have managed my health better." I studied her face, searching for any sign of the manipulative teenager who had tormented me. In that moment, all I could see was an exhausted professional who had driven herself to collapse trying to meet impossible standards I had deliberately set to ensure her failure. "The doctors say it's exhaustion and dehydration," she continued. "They want to keep me overnight, but I should be discharged in the morning. I'll be at the event tomorrow night, I promise." "That won't be necessary," I said. "Take the rest of the week to recover. The team can handle the event execution." "But that's not a suggestion, Vanessa. It's a directive. Your health comes first." She looked like she might argue further, but fatigue won out. "All right. Thank you for understanding." An uncomfortable silence fell between us. In that quiet hospital room, with the soft beeping of monitors and the distant sounds of the hospital corridor, the elaborate game I'd been playing suddenly seemed juvenile and cruel. "May I ask you something?" I said finally. Vanessa nodded. "Do you ever think about high school? About the person you were then?" The question clearly caught her off guard. She hesitated before answering, her brow furrowing slightly. "Sometimes. Why do you ask?" "Just curious. People change so much from who they were as teenagers. I wonder how many of us would even recognize our younger selves." Something shifted in her expression, a momentary vulnerability that hadn't been there before. "I don't think I'd like my teenage self very much," she said quietly. "I was not always kind." The simple admission hung in the air between us. Was it genuine reflection or just what she thought I wanted to hear? After nearly 2 months of strategic manipulation, I no longer trusted my ability to read her authentically. "Well," I said, standing up, "I should let you rest. Focus on getting better. We can discuss work when you return." "Ellie," she called as I reached the door. "Thank you for coming." "It means a lot." I nodded, unable to form an appropriate response, and left the room. The drive home was a blur of conflicting thoughts. Part of me wanted to abandon the entire revenge scenario, to simply be the successful professional I'd worked so hard to become. Another part insisted that Vanessa's apparent growth was superficial, that beneath the polished exterior remained the same cruel, entitled person who had systematically destroyed my self-worth as a teenager. How could I be sure? And more importantly, did it even matter? 10 years had passed. We were different people now. Was I clinging to ancient wounds rather than acknowledging that people, even people like Vanessa, could change? As I pulled into my parking garage, my phone chimed with a text message. It was from Jennifer in the creative department. Event setup looking great. Found old yearbook pic of new marketing director. Wasn't she the one from the stories you told me? The queen bee? My breath caught. Jennifer was the only person at the company who knew about my high school experiences. I'd shared some sanitized versions during a rare, vulnerable moment at a holiday party 2 years ago. I'd never mentioned Vanessa by name, but apparently, Jennifer had made the connection on her own. I texted back, "Let's discuss Monday." Not relevant to work. But it was relevant, wasn't it? That was the entire point of this elaborate scheme. Vanessa's past behavior was precisely why I'd hired her, why I'd subjected her to months of subtle torment, why I'd pushed her until she literally collapsed from exhaustion. I sat in my parked car, engine off, staring at nothing in particular. What was I really trying to accomplish? Revenge? Justice? Or was I simply trying to prove that I had become more powerful than the person who once made me feel completely powerless? The client appreciation event proceeded without Vanessa's presence. As expected, her creative solutions worked remarkably well despite the budget constraints. Several clients commented on the innovative approach, unaware of the behind-the-scenes drama that had produced it. I accepted compliments on behalf of the team, making sure to highlight Vanessa's contributions despite her absence. It was the professional thing to do, but also felt like the right thing, a small step toward balancing the scales I had deliberately tilted against her. After the event, I returned to my empty apartment and poured myself a generous glass of wine. The evening had been a success by any objective measure, yet I felt hollow. The satisfaction I'd anticipated from orchestrating Vanessa's professional challenges had evaporated, replaced by something more complicated. I pulled out my phone and did something I hadn't done in years. I looked at old high school photos. There I was, heavier, with frizzy hair and thick glasses, perpetually positioned at the edges of group shots. And there was Vanessa, always center frame, always confident, always seemingly untouchable. One photo in particular caught my attention. Senior year, just before everything fell apart. I was actually smiling in this one, standing next to David Chen during a science club meeting. We both looked happy, unaware of what was coming. Had Vanessa already planned her cruel prom scheme at that point? Was she watching us, calculating how best to maximize my humiliation? I zoomed in on her face in a different photo, a casual shot someone had taken in the cafeteria. She was laughing with her friends, perfectly coiffed and poised as always. But there was something in her eyes I hadn't noticed before, something that might have been insecurity or fear beneath the practiced confidence. Had I missed it then because I was too caught up in my own pain? Or was I projecting now, searching for complexity in someone I'd reduced to a two-dimensional villain in my personal narrative? I put the phone down and moved to my window, looking out at the city lights. 10 years ago, I'd promised myself that Vanessa Mitchell would never have power over me again. Yet here I was, still organizing my life around her, still letting her occupy space in my thoughts, my plans, my company. The realization was uncomfortable but clarifying. Whatever happened next, I needed to reclaim my narrative. Not as the victim seeking revenge, not as the powerful boss orchestrating comeuppance, but as someone who had moved beyond the wounds of adolescence. The question was, what did that look like? And was I capable of it? Vanessa returned to work 3 days later, looking rested but subdued. I'd instructed the team to brief her on the client event's success and to share the positive feedback her concepts had received. When she arrived at my office for our scheduled meeting, there was a cautious gratitude in her expression. "Thank you for making sure I was credited for the event," she said, taking a seat across from my desk. "The team has been incredibly supportive." I nodded. "Your work deserved recognition. How are you feeling?" "Much better. The doctors said it was just severe exhaustion and dehydration. Nothing serious." "Good. I've been thinking about your workload moving forward," I said, shifting into professional mode. The first few months were intentionally challenging. I believe in testing new executives early to understand their capabilities and limitations. It was a partial truth, reframing my deliberate sabotage as a leadership philosophy. "I understand," Vanessa replied, "and I appreciate the opportunity to prove myself, even if I pushed too hard. Moving forward, I'd like you to focus on 3 key accounts rather than the broader portfolio you've been handling. Deeper relationship building rather than the constant firefighting you've been doing." Relief flickered across her face. "That sounds ideal, actually. I've felt spread too thin to really demonstrate my strategic thinking." "Exactly. I'd also like you to build your own team structure. You've been operating too independently, which isn't sustainable." We spent the next hour discussing operational changes that would make her role more manageable. I was being fair, even generous, in my new approach, structuring her position for success rather than failure. Yet beneath this professional recalibration lurked my unresolved feelings and unanswered questions. How long could I maintain this charade? When would I reveal who I really was? Or had I changed my mind about revealing myself at all? The next few weeks established a new normal. Vanessa thrived with her narrower focus and additional support. The executive team noted her improved performance, and her relationships with colleagues strengthened as the subtle undermining I'd been orchestrating ceased. I maintained a professional distance while observing her closely. Without the constant pressure I'd been applying, Vanessa revealed herself to be competent, creative, and generally well-liked. She worked hard but no longer to the point of physical collapse. She collaborated effectively without the desperation that had marked her early weeks. Was this the real Vanessa? Or just another persona she had crafted to succeed in her current environment? I couldn't be sure, and the uncertainty gnawed at me. 3 months into her employment, the end of her probationary period, I scheduled her formal review. This would be the moment of decision. I could formally approve her permanent position and continue our strange dynamic indefinitely. I could terminate her employment, delivering a final blow of rejection. Or I could finally reveal myself and confront our shared past. The night before our meeting, I found myself unable to sleep. I paced my apartment, rehearsing different versions of what I might say, imagining her various reactions. Would she be shocked? Apologetic? Defensive? Would she even remember what she'd done to me, or was I just one of many targets she'd tormented and forgotten? By morning, I still hadn't decided on my approach. I arrived at the office early, reviewed her formal performance metrics, which were strong, and waited for our scheduled meeting with an uncomfortable mixture of anticipation and dread. Vanessa arrived precisely on time, professionally dressed as always, but with a nervous energy that manifested in the way she clutched her portfolio. "Please sit." I gestured to the chair across from my desk. "As you know, today marks the end of your probationary period." She nodded, her expression carefully neutral. "Yes. I hope my performance has met expectations, especially after the initial adjustments." "Your metrics are excellent," I said, sliding a report across the desk. "Client satisfaction with your accounts is up 12%. Your team appreciates your leadership style. And the strategic direction you've established for the Westridge campaign is particularly impressive." Relief softened her features. "Thank you. I've worked hard to align my approach with the company's values." I leaned back in my chair, studying her. After months of calculated manipulation and observation, this moment felt surreal, like the culmination of a game whose rules had somehow changed without my noticing. "Before we formalize your permanent position," I said slowly, "there's something I'd like to discuss with you." Tension immediately returned to her posture. "Of course. I'm curious about your high school experience." The question clearly caught her off guard. My ... High school experience? I'm not sure I understand the relevance. Humor me. What kind of student were you? Academically, socially? Vanessa hesitated, visibly calculating her response. I was a good student, involved in activities. Socially? I was popular, I suppose. She paused, then added with a self-deprecating smile, "Probably not as nice as I should have been looking back." "Not as nice," I repeated softly. "That's an interesting way to phrase it." She shifted uncomfortably. "Ellie, I'm not sure I understand what this has to do with my performance review." "Probably nothing," I conceded. "Just something I've been wondering about. You see, I went to Westlake High, too." The color drained from Vanessa's face so quickly I thought she might faint again. Her eyes widened as she stared at me, really looked at me, perhaps for the first time since she'd walked into my office for her initial interview. "You ... she whispered, recognition finally dawning. Eleanor Morgan." I nodded, a strange calm settling over me now that the moment had finally arrived. "Although back then, you preferred to call me Smelly Ellie, didn't you?" Her hand moved to her mouth, horror replacing shock. "Oh my God. It's been an interesting few months, hasn't it? Working together, getting to know each other as adults." My voice remained steady, almost conversational. "I've been curious whether you'd recognize me on your own." "I don't know what to say," she managed, her composure completely shattered. I didn't realize that the girl you tormented for 4 years would eventually become your boss?" "Yes, life takes unexpected turns." Vanessa looked physically ill, her breathing shallow. "Is that why you hired me?" To get revenge? The direct question deserved a direct answer. "Yes. Initially. I saw your application and thought it was perfect cosmic justice. I could do to you professionally what you did to me socially in high school." She flinched as though I'd slapped her. "And these past 3 months, the impossible deadlines, the isolation, all deliberately orchestrated," I confirmed. "I wanted you to feel what I felt, constantly set up to fail, socially ostracized, perpetually anxious." Tears filled her eyes, but she made no move to wipe them away. "I don't know what to say except I'm sorry. I was horrible to you, to many people. I don't have excuses." "I don't want excuses," I said. "I wanted understanding. I wanted you to experience what it felt like. And now you have." Vanessa nodded slowly, tears now tracking down her cheeks. "So what happens now? I assume I'm terminated?" It was the question I'd been asking myself for weeks, and surprisingly, I found I had an answer. "Actually, no. You're confirmed in your position, effective immediately." Her head snapped up, confusion replacing despair. "What?" "I don't understand." I sighed, the weight of 10 years of anger and resentment finally shifting. "Neither do I entirely. But here's what I do know. You're good at your job." Despite everything I did to sabotage you, you've proven yourself valuable to this company. And more importantly, I'm tired of organizing my life around what happened in high school. But after what I did to you was unforgivable, I finished for her. Yes, and what I've done these past few months hasn't been much better. I deliberately pushed you until you collapsed from exhaustion. I manipulated your professional relationships. I created circumstances designed to break you. Saying it aloud made my actions sound even worse than they had in my private reflections. The difference is, I continued, I'm stopping. I'm choosing to end this cycle. I leaned forward, meeting her tear-filled eyes directly. We're not the same people we were in high school, Vanessa. At least I hope we're not. I don't want to be the kind of person who destroys others to heal my own wounds. Vanessa wiped her tears, visibly struggling to process this unexpected turn. I don't deserve this second chance. Probably not, I agreed, but I'm not doing it for you. I'm doing it for me. Carrying this hatred, executing this revenge plan, it's been exhausting in ways I didn't anticipate. I want to move forward, not keep looking back. A fragile silence filled the office as we regarded each other across the desk. Two women connected by a painful past, but facing an uncertain future. What do you want from me? Vanessa finally asked, her voice barely above a whisper. It was the question at the heart of everything. What had I really wanted all along? Revenge? Justice? Acknowledgement? Or something else entirely? I want you to be excellent at your job, I said after a moment. I want you to treat everyone who works with you with the respect and kindness you didn't show when we were younger. And I want us both to prove that people can change, that the worst moments of our past don't have to define our future. Vanessa nodded slowly, a complex mixture of emotions playing across her face. I can do that. I will do that. Good. I handed her the signed confirmation of her permanent position. Consider your probationary period successfully completed. She took the document with trembling hands. Thank you, Ellie. I know those words are insufficient, but they're a start, I said, rising from my chair to signal the end of our meeting. We have the Drummond presentation next week. I'd like your strategic recommendation on my desk by Friday. Vanessa stood, clearly struggling to shift back to professional footing after such an emotional revelation. Of course. It'll be there. As she reached the door, I called after her. Vanessa? She turned, her expression cautious. I meant what I said about proving people can change. But if you ever go back to being the person you were in high school, if you ever mistreat anyone on my team the way you mistreated me, I will terminate your employment instantly. Is that clear? Her shoulders straightened, and for a moment, I caught a glimpse of genuine determination beneath the vulnerability. Perfectly clear, but it won't be necessary. I'm not that person anymore. I'll prove it to you. After she left, I stood at my office window, looking out at the city below. 10 years of anger, of pain, of plotting elaborate revenge, and in the end, the most powerful move had been simply to let it go. Not to forgive and forget, exactly, but to acknowledge the past without allowing it to control the future. I didn't know if Vanessa and I would ever develop anything resembling friendship. I didn't know if her remorse was genuine or if she would follow through on her promises to be better. I didn't even know if I'd made the right decision in keeping her employed after revealing my identity. But for the first time since I'd seen her walk through those glass doors 3 months ago, I felt truly in control. Not of her, but of myself. The high school queen bee who had made my life hell was now my employee, aware of our history and committed to proving she had changed. And I was no longer the damaged teenage girl seeking revenge, but a successful professional who had chosen compassion over retribution, growth over grudges. It wasn't the ending I had planned. It was better. The days following my revelation to Vanessa took on a surreal quality. The office continued its normal rhythms, meetings scheduled, clients called, deadlines met, while beneath the surface, something fundamental had shifted. Vanessa and I moved around each other with careful precision, our professional interactions polite but charged with unspoken tension. I'd catch her watching me sometimes, her expression a complex mixture of shame, confusion, and something that might have been relief. That was unexpected, the relief. I'd anticipated anger, perhaps, or resentment at my manipulation. But on several occasions, I'd noticed her shoulders relaxing when she thought no one was looking, as though some heavy burden had been partially lifted. I understood that feeling better than she knew. My own relief at ending the deception had been immediate and profound, like setting down a heavy suitcase I'd been carrying for months, years even. The Drummond presentation looks good. I told her during our first scheduled meeting after the revelation. We were sitting in the small conference room adjacent to my office, the glass walls offering the illusion of privacy while keeping us visible to the rest of the team, a deliberate choice on my part. "Thank you," she replied, her voice carefully professional. "I've incorporated the feedback from research about their target demographic shifts." "I see that." I flipped through the presentation slides. The strategic pivot towards sustainability messaging is particularly strong. Vanessa nodded, her eyes fixed on the documents between us rather than meeting my gaze. Their competitors are still focused on luxury positioning. This gives Drummond a unique space in the market. The conversation continued in this vein, coolly efficient, stripped of any personal dimension. We discussed metrics and messaging strategies as though the most emotionally charged confrontation of our adult lives hadn't occurred just days earlier. It was, in its way, a relief. Work provided structure, a framework for interaction that didn't require us to immediately navigate the complicated emotional terrain between us. But that evening, as I was preparing to leave, Vanessa appeared in my office doorway. "Do you have a minute?" she asked, her usual confidence notably absent. I gestured to the chair across from my desk. "Of course." She sat, placing a folder on the desk between us but making no move to open it. For several moments, she seemed to struggle with what to say. "This isn't about work," she finally admitted. "I've been thinking about our conversation, about high school, about everything." I leaned back in my chair, willing myself to remain emotionally neutral. "Go on." "I want you to know that I remember everything." Her voice was quiet but steady. "Not just the broad strokes of how I treated you, but the specific incidents. The journal reading in the cafeteria, the rumors about your mother, the prom situation with David Chen." She swallowed hard. "I remember it all." Something tight in my chest loosened slightly at her words. Part of me had wondered if I'd loomed as large in her memory as she had in mine, if the events that had shaped so much of my adolescence had been mere footnotes in hers. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked. "Because I want you to know that when I apologize, I'm apologizing for actual things I did, not some vague notion of having been not nice." Her eyes finally met mine, unwavering despite the evident discomfort. "I was cruel to you deliberately and consistently, and I am deeply sorry for the pain I caused." It was more than I'd expected, this specific acknowledgement of her actions rather than a generalized expression of regret. But was it enough? Could anything ever be enough to balance the scales? "Thank you for saying that," I replied carefully. "I appreciate the specificity." A flash of something like disappointment crossed her face at my measured response. Had she expected immediate forgiveness? Absolution for the asking? "I don't expect this to change anything between us," she continued as though reading my thoughts. "You've been more than fair, allowing me to keep my position here. I just needed you to know that I remember, and I regret my actions more than I can adequately express." I studied her face, searching for signs of manipulation or insincerity. Being vulnerable had never been Vanessa's style, at least not the Vanessa I'd known. This level of emotional honesty felt unfamiliar, almost disorienting. "Why were you like that in high school?" The question escaped before I could consider its professional appropriateness. "What made you so consistently cruel?" Vanessa looked momentarily taken aback by the directness of my query, but then she nodded as though she'd been expecting it. "That's fair," she said. "You deserve an explanation." She took a deep breath. "The simple answer is that I was deeply insecure and had been taught that the way to succeed socially was to establish dominance. My mother was," she paused, searching for the right word, "intensely focused on social status. Being popular wasn't optional in our household. It was a requirement." I remembered Vanessa's mother vaguely, an immaculately dressed woman who had chaired every parent committee and whose critical gaze had seemed to evaluate everyone against an invisible standard. "That's not an excuse," Vanessa continued quickly. "Plenty of people have difficult parents without becoming bullies. But by the time I realized how toxic my behavior was, I'd built my entire identity around being on top of the social hierarchy. I didn't know who I was without that. And now?" I asked, genuinely curious. "Who are you now?" She gave a small, sad smile. "Still figuring that out. The past few years have been clarifying. Losing my position at Archer and Rome was the culmination of a long pattern of prioritizing status over substance. It forced me to confront some uncomfortable truths about myself." The vulnerability in her admission was startling. This was not the carefully constructed professional narrative she'd presented in her interview, but something rawer and more authentic. "I appreciate your candor," I said finally. It can't have been easy to share that. No easier than what you've been through, she replied. What I put you through? She hesitated, then added, if you'd prefer I tender my resignation, I would understand completely. The offer caught me off guard. I'd expected her to cling to the job security I'd somewhat unexpectedly offered. This willingness to walk away suggested either genuine remorse or a calculated bid to appear remorseful. With our history, it was difficult to know which. That won't be necessary, I said after a moment's consideration. As I said before, you're good at your job. The company benefits from your expertise. And you? She asked quietly. Do you benefit from having to work with someone who caused you so much pain? It was the question I'd been asking myself since our confrontation. Did maintaining a professional relationship with Vanessa serve my well-being, or was I simply exchanging one form of unhealthy fixation for another? I don't know yet, I answered honestly. But I'm willing to find out. She nodded, accepting this ambiguous response. Thank you for your time. And for your honesty? She rose to leave, then paused. For what it's worth, Eleanor, I admire the person you've become. Your success is well-deserved. After she left, I remained at my desk, turning our conversation over in my mind. Her apology had been more specific, more seemingly genuine than I'd anticipated. But trust, once shattered, doesn't reassemble easily. I'd need time to determine whether Vanessa's remorse was authentic or simply another performance designed to secure her position. The following weeks brought a gradual shift in our professional dynamic. The initial stiffness began to thaw as we established new patterns of interaction. Vanessa was meticulously professional, thorough in her work, respectful in meetings, and noticeably careful to credit team members for their contributions. I watched her closely, looking for signs of the old Vanessa, the cutting remarks disguised as constructive criticism, the subtle social maneuvering, the strategic alliances formed at others' expense. But those behaviors seemed absent. Instead, I observed someone working diligently to prove herself through substance rather than style. Her presentations were thoroughly researched, her strategic recommendations sound, her management of her team balanced between challenging and supportive. She worked late without complaint, took on difficult clients without drama, and navigated office politics with a newfound humility. Was it genuine growth or just a carefully constructed facade designed to secure her position? I couldn't be certain, and that uncertainty kept me vigilant, watching for cracks in the performance. The opportunity to test Vanessa's supposed transformation came 6 weeks after our confrontation, when Morgan Media pitched for the Levinson account, a prestigious cosmetics brand that would significantly raise our agency's profile. The pitch team included Vanessa and Jennifer from the creative department, the same Jennifer who had recognized Vanessa from my high school stories. I don't understand why she's even still working here, Jennifer said when she stopped by my office before the pitch preparations began. After what she did to you in high school, I'd have fired her on the spot. I sighed, regretting my past indiscretion in sharing those stories. It's complicated, Jen. People change. Bullies don't change, she insisted. They just find more sophisticated ways to be cruel. Maybe, I conceded. But I'd rather judge her on her current behavior than her past actions. Jennifer looked unconvinced but dropped the subject. Well, it's your company? I just hope you know what you're doing. I wasn't entirely sure I did know what I was doing. Keeping Vanessa employed was a risk, personally, professionally, emotionally. But something in me needed to see this through, to discover whether people truly could transcend their worst selves. The Levinson pitch became a crucible of sorts. The timeline was aggressive, the client notoriously demanding, and the competition fierce. Vanessa and Jennifer were forced to work closely together despite Jennifer's obvious distrust. I deliberately maintained distance from the process, curious to see how Vanessa would handle the pressure and interpersonal tension without my direct oversight. Reports filtered back to me through various channels. Vanessa was putting in 18-hour days. She'd brought in lunch for the entire team during crunch time. When one of the junior designers had a family emergency, she'd covered his work without complaint. More surprisingly, she and Jennifer seemed to be developing a grudging professional respect, their initial frostiness gradually giving way to collaborative focus. 3 days before the pitch, disaster struck. A conceptual cornerstone of our campaign was inadvertently leaked to a competing agency, not through malice but through a careless conversation at an industry event. The team would need to pivot completely, developing a new central concept in less than 72 hours. I called Vanessa into my office as soon as I heard the news. I assume you've been briefed on the situation? I said as she took a seat. She nodded, her expression grave but composed. Yes. We've already scheduled an emergency team meeting for this afternoon to develop alternative approaches. This account is crucial for our growth targets this quarter. I'm aware. She met my gaze steadily. We won't let you down. Under normal circumstances, I would have stepped in, leveraging my experience and authority to guide the team through this crisis. But I deliberately held back, curious to see how Vanessa would handle this test of her leadership. The next 72 hours were a blur of activity. The pitch team practically lived at the office, ordering in meals and occasionally napping on the office sofas. I observed from a distance, noting with interest how Vanessa managed both the creative challenge and the team dynamics. When Jennifer's initial concept for the repositioning faltered during internal reviews, I expected conflict. Instead, I witnessed something surprising: Vanessa defending Jennifer's core idea while offering constructive suggestions for refinement. Rather than seizing the opportunity to assert dominance in a moment of vulnerability, she demonstrated collaborative leadership. The essence of your concept is brilliant. I overheard her telling Jennifer late one night as they worked in the conference room. It just needs stronger alignment with their existing brand values. What if we approached it from this angle instead? The morning of the pitch, I found Vanessa in the office kitchen, preparing coffee for the team while reviewing note cards. She looked exhausted but focused, the strain of the past 3 days evident in the shadows beneath her eyes. "Are you ready?" I asked. She looked up, momentarily startled by my presence. "As ready as we can be, given the circumstances. The team has done extraordinary work. And you?" I pressed. "How are you holding up?" A flicker of vulnerability crossed her face before her professional mask slipped back into place. "I'm fine. Tired, but that's to be expected." I studied her for a moment, recognizing the signs of someone pushing beyond their limits, something I'd deliberately encouraged during her early months at the company, but which now gave me pause. "You know," I said carefully, "there was a time when I would have taken satisfaction in seeing you stretched to your breaking point." Her hands stilled on the coffee mugs. "And now? Now I find I prefer seeing you succeed through merit rather than fail through manipulation." A complex emotion passed across her features, relief mingled with something like gratitude. "Thank you for that." "Don't thank me yet," I cautioned. "We still need to win this account." She nodded, straightening her shoulders. "We will." And remarkably, they did. The pitch was by all accounts exceptional, creative yet grounded in market realities, innovative while respecting the client's established brand identity. Jennifer's concept, refined through Vanessa's strategic lens, resonated perfectly with the Levinson team. We received notification of our selection the following week. The office celebration was jubilant, champagne flowing as the team reveled in their hard-won success. I watched from the periphery as Vanessa accepted congratulations with grace, consistently redirecting praise to team members' specific contributions rather than claiming central credit. Jennifer approached me, champagne flute in hand, her expression thoughtful. "I might have been wrong about her," she admitted, nodding toward Vanessa. "She was actually impressive during this pitch process." "In what way?" I asked, genuinely curious about Jennifer's perspective. "She pushed us to do our best work without being dictatorial. And when things went sideways with the leak, she never once looked for someone to blame. She just focused on solutions." Jennifer shrugged. "Not what I expected based on your high school stories." "People can surprise you," I said, more to myself than to Jennifer. Later that evening, as the celebration wound down, I found Vanessa in her office, organizing materials from the pitch while the sounds of the party continued in the common area. "You should be celebrating with the team," I said from her doorway. "This was largely your victory." She looked up, a tired smile touching her lips. "It was a team effort. I'm just gathering my thoughts before heading back out there." I entered her office, taking a seat across from her desk in a reversal of our usual positions. "You did well, Vanessa. The client specifically mentioned your strategic framework as a deciding factor." "Thank you." She hesitated, then added, "That means a lot coming from you." An unexpected question formed in my mind. "Does your mother know you work for me?" Surprise flickered across her face at this apparent non sequitur. "No. We don't speak much these days." "May I ask why?" Vanessa set down the papers she'd been organizing, her expression becoming more guarded. "After Archer and Rome, I had to do some serious reflection on the patterns in my life. My mother's influence wasn't healthy. She always taught me that vulnerability was weakness, that success meant ensuring others failed, that appearances mattered more than substance. She shook her head slightly. I realized I couldn't grow into someone better while maintaining that relationship. It was a surprisingly resonant admission. I'd spent years working through similar issues with my own mother, though in my case the patterns had been about self-worth rather than social status. That couldn't have been easy, I acknowledged. No easier than what you did, she replied. Confronting me about our past rather than simply exercising your power to fire me, that took courage. Her statement caught me off guard. I hadn't thought of my revelation as courageous, calculated perhaps, or even self-indulgent, but not brave. I had all the power in that situation, I pointed out. There was little risk for me. I disagree, Vanessa said quietly. You risked discovering I hadn't changed at all. That the person who hurt you so deeply was exactly the same, just in adult form. That would have confirmed your worst fears about human nature. Her insight was unexpectedly perceptive, touching on anxieties I hadn't fully articulated even to myself. And what would you have done? I asked, if I had fired you after revealing who I was. She considered the question seriously. I would have understood. And I probably would have written you a letter, a real one, not a professional formality, acknowledging everything I did and taking full responsibility. It wouldn't have changed anything, but you deserved that acknowledgement. I studied her face, searching for signs of manipulation or insincerity. Instead, I found what appeared to be genuine reflection, a quality I'd never associated with the Vanessa of my memories. Well, I said, rising from my seat, it seems we're both in unfamiliar territory, learning who we are beyond our past patterns. She nodded, a small smile touching her lips. Terrifying, isn't it? Completely. I agreed, surprised into a brief answering smile. Now come back to the celebration. Your team deserves to see their leader participating in their success. The Levinson win marked a turning point in the office dynamics. Vanessa's position within the company strengthened, her initial isolation giving way to genuine professional respect from colleagues. The calculated social undermining I'd orchestrated months earlier had completely ceased, allowing natural relationships to develop based on current interactions rather than my hidden agenda. I observed these changes with mixed emotions. On one hand, I took professional satisfaction in having a high-performing executive successfully integrated into the team. On the other, watching Vanessa thrive stirred complicated feelings about justice, forgiveness, and the lingering effects of past wounds. We need to discuss the quarterly strategy meeting. Sarah, my assistant, reminded me one morning in late October. It's scheduled for the weekend retreat at Lakeview Lodge next month. I groaned inwardly. The quarterly offsite was a company tradition, 2 days of intensive planning followed by team-building activities in a rustic but luxurious mountain setting. Under normal circumstances, I looked forward to these retreats. But the prospect of spending an extended weekend in close quarters with Vanessa, away from the professional buffer of the office environment, filled me with unease. Is everything confirmed with the venue? I asked, buying time while I considered my options. Yes, all set, Sarah replied. The department heads have been notified, including Vanessa. She's already confirmed her attendance. Of course she had. Maintaining professional commitment was clearly part of her redemption strategy. Perfect, I said with a confidence I didn't feel. Please make sure the agenda includes extended breakout sessions on the second day. I want the department heads to have time to develop their quarterly objectives independently before we consolidate them into the company roadmap. Sarah made a note. Will do. Anything else? No, that's all for now. After she left, I stared out my office window, contemplating the upcoming retreat. 2 days in a mountain lodge with Vanessa and the executive team. Shared meals, team-building exercises, evening socializing around the massive stone fireplace. The professional distance we'd maintained these past months would be impossible to preserve in such an intimate setting. Was I ready for that? Was she? The question lingered in my mind over the following weeks as preparations for the retreat progressed. I found myself watching Vanessa more closely again, but with different intent. Rather than looking for flaws to exploit, I was searching for indications of how she might behave in a less structured environment. What I observed was someone who had developed a nuanced understanding of professional boundaries. Vanessa was collegial without being presumptuous, engaged without dominating conversations, present at office social functions without being the center of attention. She seemed to have found a balance that I hadn't thought possible for the spotlight-seeking teenager I remembered. The night before the retreat, I worked late, finalizing my presentation materials. Around 9, movement in the periphery of my vision drew my attention to the hallway, where Vanessa was emerging from her office, coat draped over her arm. "You're here late," I observed as she paused in my doorway. "Last-minute preparations for tomorrow?" she explained. I wanted to make sure my departmental objectives were properly aligned with the company vision. "Commendable," I said, though I'm sure they were already aligned. She smiled slightly. "Double-checking is a habit I've developed. Helps manage the anxiety." It was a small admission of vulnerability that caught me off guard. The Vanessa Mitchell I'd known would never have acknowledged anxiety. It would have been perceived as weakness. "About the retreat," she continued, her voice carefully neutral. "I wanted to check if there's anything specific you need from me, given our history." The question surprised me with its directness. "What do you mean?" "I mean, these retreats involve close quarters, social time, team exercises, all potentially awkward given our past." She met my gaze directly. "If you'd prefer I maintain particular boundaries or perhaps skip certain social aspects, I'm happy to accommodate that." It was a considerate offer, acknowledging the complex dynamics between us without making assumptions about my comfort level. Another sign of growth I hadn't anticipated. "I appreciate the consideration," I said after a moment, "but I think we've both demonstrated we can maintain professional interactions despite our history." "Absolutely," she agreed quickly. "I just didn't want to presume." "No presumption noted." I hesitated, then added, "Though perhaps we should agree to avoid conversation topics like high school reunions or teenage fashion choices." A brief smile touched her lips. "Noted and agreed." She shifted her coat to her other arm. "See you tomorrow, then." After she left, I sat contemplating our exchange. Her awareness of potential discomfort and willingness to adapt her behavior accordingly showed an empathetic consideration I'd never associated with Vanessa Mitchell. Was this growth genuine or simply a more sophisticated form of social manipulation? The question followed me home that night and into the next morning as I drove the winding mountain roads toward Lakeview Lodge. The autumn foliage created a spectacular tapestry of red and gold against the deep evergreen of the pines, but I barely noticed the scenery, my thoughts occupied with the challenges of the weekend ahead. The lodge appeared around a final curve, its massive timber framework and stone foundation nestled perfectly into the mountainside. Cars belonging to early arrivals already dotted the parking area. I recognized Vanessa's sleek silver Audi among them. Inside, the lodge hummed with the energy of my team settling in. Staff members greeted one another in the soaring great room, where a fire already crackled in the massive stone fireplace. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, the lake shimmered in the afternoon sunlight. "Eleanor!" "There you are." Marcus, our CFO, approached with a cup of coffee in hand. "Everyone's arrived except for Diane from legal, who's running about an hour behind." "Perfect," I said, slipping into professional mode. "Let's gather in the main conference room at 3 to review the agenda." The initial meeting proceeded smoothly, with each department head presenting their preparatory materials for the strategy sessions scheduled for the following day. Vanessa's presentation was thorough and insightful, demonstrating clear alignment with overall company objectives while pushing for strategic growth in key market segments. "I particularly like the emphasis on sustainability messaging," I commented after she finished. "That aligns perfectly with where we see client priorities heading in the coming year." She nodded, accepting the feedback with professional grace. "The market research shows increasing consumer preference for brands with authentic environmental commitments. If we position ourselves as leaders in that space now, we'll be ahead of the inevitable industry shift." The meeting concluded with review of the weekend schedule, dinner at 7, followed by informal socializing, then intensive strategy sessions the next day, concluding with team-building activities before Sunday brunch and departure. As everyone dispersed to settle into their rooms before dinner, I found myself alone with Vanessa in the conference room, both of us gathering our materials. "Your market analysis was impressive," I said, breaking the slightly awkward silence. "Particularly the generational breakdown of sustainability messaging impact." "Thank you," she replied. "I've been tracking those trends since the Drummond campaign showed such strong results in that segment." We continued gathering our papers, the conversation lapsing into silence again. "This is strange, isn't it?" Vanessa finally said, looking up from her portfolio. "Being here together, away from the office." I appreciated her willingness to acknowledge the elephant in the room. "Yes, it is." For what it's worth, she added, I'm going to do everything possible to ensure you feel comfortable this weekend. She hesitated, then continued, I know that probably sounds ridiculous coming from me, given our history, but I mean it. The sincerity in her voice was disarming. Thank you. I believe you do. And surprisingly, I found that I did believe her. Whatever her past actions, whatever manipulative tendencies she might still harbor, in this moment, her concern seemed genuine. Dinner that evening was served in the lodge's private dining room, a beautifully appointed space with views of the lake and mountains beyond. The executive team, 8 people including myself and Vanessa, gathered around a massive oak table while lodge staff served a meal showcasing local seasonal ingredients. I'd seated Vanessa between Marcus and Jennifer, positioning myself at the opposite end of the table, not out of avoidance but to ensure balanced conversation. As dinner progressed, I found myself observing her social interactions with my team. The Vanessa I remembered from high school had dominated every conversation, steering topics toward areas where she could shine and subtly undermining others. This Vanessa was different, attentive rather than attention-seeking, asking thoughtful questions rather than redirecting focus to herself, laughing genuinely at others' jokes rather than waiting for her moment to deliver the perfect witty remark. After dinner, the group migrated to the great room, where the staff had prepared a selection of desserts and drinks near the roaring fireplace. The atmosphere was relaxed, the conversations flowing easily between professional matters and personal anecdotes. I found myself seated on one of the leather sofas, discussing industry trends with Diane from legal, when Vanessa approached with 2 glasses of wine. I noticed your glass was empty, she said, offering me one of the glasses. Pinot Noir, right? Thank you, I said, surprised that she'd noticed my wine preference. That's thoughtful. She shrugged lightly. I pay attention. It was a simple statement, but one that carried weight given our history. The Vanessa who had tormented me in high school had never truly seen me, had never bothered to notice my preferences, my feelings, anything beyond my usefulness as a target. This small gesture of attentiveness felt significant. As the evening progressed, I found myself gradually relaxing. The professional rapport Vanessa and I had developed over recent months translated better to this social setting than I'd anticipated. We weren't friends, the history between us precluded that level of ease, but we were colleagues capable of civil, even pleasant interaction. Around 11, as people began drifting off to their rooms in preparation for the early start the next day, I found myself alone by the fireplace, finishing my wine and reviewing notes for tomorrow's sessions. Footsteps on the hardwood floor announced Vanessa's approach. Mind if I join you for a moment? She asked, gesturing to the adjacent armchair. I nodded my assent, setting aside my notes. She sat, cradling her own glass of wine. Today went well, I think? The team seems aligned on the core strategic directions. Yes, I was pleased with the initial presentations. I studied her over the rim of my glass. Yours in particular showed a deep understanding of where we need to be positioning ourselves for next year. Thank you. She took a sip of her wine, her gaze fixed on the dancing flames in the fireplace. You know, there are moments when I almost forget the circumstances that brought me to Morgan Media. And then I remember, and I'm struck by how bizarre this situation would seem to anyone who knew our history. She turned to face me fully. I'm working for someone I tormented in high school, trying to prove I'm not the same person, while she watches for evidence that I've truly changed. The directness of her assessment was startling but accurate. When you put it that way, it does sound like the premise for a psychological thriller. A small smile touched her lips. Or a particularly heavy-handed morality tale. Perhaps both, I conceded, finding unexpected comfort in this acknowledgement of our strange circumstances. May I ask you something personal? She said after a moment. I hesitated, then nodded cautiously. What happened after prom night? After you left Westlake? Her voice was soft, almost tentative. I've wondered for years, especially after I recognized you during our confrontation. The question caught me off guard. I'd never considered that Vanessa might have given any thought to my fate after her systematic destruction of my high school experience. The idea that she had wondered, perhaps even felt remorse before our recent interactions, was unsettling in its humanization of the villain in my personal narrative. I transferred to Northside High for the last month of senior year, I said finally. Got my diploma without ceremony, then went to state on scholarship. Double majored in business and communications, then started working at Lambert and Associates as a junior account manager. She listened intently, her expression somber. And personally? After what happened, I considered deflecting the question but found myself answering honestly instead. I was broken for a while. Trust issues, social anxiety, the usual aftermath of sustained bullying and public humiliation. I took a sip of wine. Therapy helped. So did finding my professional footing. Vanessa's gaze dropped to her hands. I'm sorry doesn't begin to cover it. No, it doesn't. I agreed, not unkindly. But it's a starting point. She nodded, accepting this assessment. For what it's worth, watching you now, the leader you've become, the company you've built, I'm in awe of your resilience. Most people wouldn't have recovered so completely. I wouldn't say completely, I admitted. The fact that I hired you specifically to exact revenge suggests there are still some unresolved issues there. A surprised laugh escaped her. Fair point. We sat in surprisingly comfortable silence for a few moments, watching the flames. What about you? I asked eventually. After high school, before Archer and Rome. She seemed surprised by my interest but answered readily. Northeastern University, marketing degree. Started in the mailroom at Granger Advertising, worked my way up to account executive, then jumped to Archer and Rome when they offered me the associate director position. And socially? Were you still? I searched for a diplomatic phrase. A manipulative, status-obsessed bully? She supplied with unexpected frankness. Yes and no. The overt cruelty faded. I didn't need to put others down quite so explicitly to maintain my position. But the underlying patterns remained. Relationships were transactional. Friendships lasted only as long as they benefited me. Romance was about status, not connection. Her self-awareness was disarming. What changed? Reality intervened, she said simply. Status-seeking works until it doesn't. At Archer and Rome, I alienated too many colleagues climbing the ladder. When things went sideways with the Henderson account, no one had my back. I lost my job, my apartment, my fair weather friends, all in the span of 6 months. That sounds difficult, I said, finding myself genuinely sympathetic despite our history. It was the best thing that could have happened to me, she replied with surprising earnestness. Complete collapse of my carefully constructed facade. No choice but to confront who I really was and who I wanted to become. Her words resonated more deeply than I cared to admit. My own journey of self-discovery had been less dramatic, but no less profound. A gradual recognition that success alone couldn't heal the wounds of my past. And who do you want to become? I asked, genuinely curious. She considered the question seriously. Someone defined by what she builds rather than who she diminishes. Someone whose success doesn't require others' failure. She met my gaze directly. Someone who makes amends where possible, even when forgiveness isn't offered. The sincerity in her expression was unmistakable. Whatever calculation might be involved in her current behavior, there was also authentic reflection happening, an actual reckoning with her past actions. That's a worthy aspiration, I acknowledged. Not easily achieved, but worthy. No, she agreed softly. Not easily achieved at all. We finished our wine in companionable silence, the crackling fire and occasional distant laughter from remaining team members the only sounds in the great room. It was the longest, most personal conversation we'd had since her arrival at Morgan Media, and surprisingly, it hadn't been uncomfortable. As we prepared to retire for the evening, Vanessa paused at the foot of the grand staircase. "Thank you for this conversation," she said, "and for seeing the possibility that I might be more than my worst actions." I nodded, not quite ready to express the complex emotions her words evoked. "Good night, Vanessa." "Good night, Eleanor." As I readied for bed in my lodge room, I found myself reflecting on our exchange. The genuine remorse in Vanessa's eyes, the thoughtful consideration she'd shown throughout the day, the specific acknowledgement of her past behavior, all suggested authentic growth rather than mere performance. Yet doubt lingered. Was I being naive? Manipulated by someone who had perfected the art of social engineering? Or was I witnessing actual redemption? The transformation of a person who had caused me tremendous pain into someone worthy of professional respect, perhaps even personal forgiveness. I fell asleep with these questions still circling in my mind, uncertain of the answers but increasingly open to possibilities I hadn't previously considered. The strategy sessions the next day were productive and mercifully free of interpersonal tension. Vanessa contributed thoughtfully to discussions, supported others' ideas, and presented her department's objectives with clarity and vision. I found myself genuinely impressed by her strategic thinking, separate from any personal considerations. After lunch, we moved into the team-building portion of the retreat. activities designed to strengthen collaboration and trust among the executive team. Under normal circumstances, I enjoyed these exercises for their team-strengthening benefits. Today, I approached them with trepidation, aware of the potential for awkwardness given my history with Vanessa. "For our first activity," announced the facilitator, a cheerful outdoor education specialist named Brian, "we'll be working on communication and trust. I'll need you to pair up." I watched with mild anxiety as the team quickly formed pairs, leaving Vanessa and me as the obvious remaining duo. She met my gaze across the room, her expression suggesting she was equally aware of the potential discomfort. "Perfect," Brian continued, oblivious to any underlying tension. "One person from each pair will be blindfolded, while the other provides verbal guidance through an obstacle course we've set up on the lawn." He held up several blindfolds. "Who wants to be guided first, and who wants to guide?" Before I could respond, Vanessa spoke up. "I'm happy to be blindfolded first," she offered, stepping forward to take one of the masks. The symbolism wasn't lost on me, her willingness to make herself vulnerable, to place her trust in the person she had once victimized. It was either a genuine peace offering or a calculated move designed to appear magnanimous. Either way, it shifted the dynamic between us in an unexpected direction. "All right then," I said, accepting my role as guide. Outside, the obstacle course looked simple but required precise navigation, cones to weave between, low hurdles to step over, platforms to balance on briefly. Nothing dangerous, but certainly challenges that required clear communication and trust between partners. As Vanessa secured her blindfold, I found myself in the strange position of being responsible for her safe passage, a reversal of power dynamics that was not lost on either of us. "Ready?" I asked, standing beside but not touching her. "Ready," she confirmed, her voice betraying a hint of nervousness. "Take 2 steps forward," I began, keeping my voice clear and calm. "Then turn slightly right, about 15 degrees. She followed my directions precisely, moving with cautious confidence through the obstacle course. I guided her around cones, over hurdles, onto and off of platforms, maintaining a steady stream of specific instructions. She listened attentively, never questioning my guidance even when it led her into seemingly counterintuitive movements. "You're doing well," I said as she successfully navigated a particularly tricky section. "Just a few more obstacles to go." "I trust you," she replied simply, the words carrying weight beyond this superficial exercise. When she completed the course without a single misstep, the rest of the team applauded. Vanessa removed her blindfold, blinking in the bright sunlight, a smile of accomplishment lighting her face. "Nice job, boss," she said with genuine warmth. "Perfect guidance." Now it was my turn to be blindfolded, to place my physical safety, in however minor a way, in Vanessa's hands. As I secured the mask over my eyes, blocking out all visual input, I was struck by the metaphorical significance. How much trust was I willing to place in this person who had once betrayed my trust so completely? "I've got you," Vanessa said quietly as she took position beside me. "Small step forward to begin." Her voice was calm and assured as she guided me through the course, her directions specific and timely. I followed her instructions, finding myself moving smoothly despite my inability to see the obstacles. There was something unexpectedly freeing about the experience, the simple focus on one step at a time, one instruction after another, without the burden of history or expectation. "You're approaching the final platform," she explained. "It's about 6 inches high. One large step up, then balance for a moment, then step down on the other side." I completed the movement as directed, then felt her hand lightly touch my elbow, our first physical contact since her arrival at Morgan Media. "Congratulations," she said warmly as I removed my blindfold. "Perfect run." The rest of the team had already moved on to the next activity station, leaving us a brief moment of privacy. "Thank you for the clear guidance," I said, folding the blindfold and handing it back to Brian. "Thank you for trusting it," she replied, a deeper meaning evident in her tone. The remainder of the afternoon continued with similar exercises, trust falls, problem-solving challenges, collaborative building projects. Through each activity, Vanessa and I maintained a professional rapport that gradually evolved into something almost comfortable. Not friendship exactly, but a mutual respect that acknowledged our complex history without being defined by it. By the time we gathered for the retreat's final dinner, the executive team had coalesced into a more unified group, the strategy for the coming quarter clearly defined, the interpersonal bonds strengthened. I felt a professional satisfaction in watching my leadership team interact with increased trust and collaborative energy. "I'd like to propose a toast," Marcus announced as dessert was served, "to Eleanor for building not just a successful company but a true team." He raised his glass. "Your leadership makes all of this possible." "Hear, hear," the others echoed, raising their glasses. As I accepted their acknowledgement with grateful words about their individual contributions, I noticed Vanessa watching me with an expression I couldn't quite interpret, something beyond professional respect or collegial appreciation, something more personal. Later, as the evening wound down and people began drifting toward their rooms in preparation for the morning departure, Vanessa approached me on the lodge's wide porch, where I stood enjoying the crisp night air and star-filled sky. "It was a successful retreat," she said, leaning against the porch railing beside me. "The team is stronger for it." "I think so too," I agreed. "The strategic alignment for Q4 is clearer than it's been all year." We stood in comfortable silence for a moment, the soft glow from the lodge windows illuminating the wooden deck while leaving the surrounding forest in darkness. "I've been thinking about our conversation last night," Vanessa said finally, "about who I was and who I'm trying to become." I turned slightly to observe her profile against the night sky, and I realized there's something I've never properly expressed. She turned to face me fully. "I'm truly proud to work for you, Eleanor. Not just because Morgan Media is an exceptional company, but because of who you are as a leader and a person." The sincerity in her voice was unmistakable, catching me off guard. "The fact that you built this success after what you experienced, what I put you through, speaks to an extraordinary strength of character," she continued. "The fact that you've given me this second chance, that you're willing to see me as I am now rather than only as I was then." She shook her head slightly. "It's a grace I don't deserve, but am profoundly grateful for." Her words touched something deep within me, a place that had been waiting for this specific acknowledgement perhaps longer than I'd realized. Not just an apology for past wrongs, but recognition of who I had become despite those wrongs. Not just remorse, but admiration. "Thank you for saying that," I replied, my voice softer than intended. "It means more than I expected it would." She nodded, seeming to understand the weight of the moment without needing further explanation. "I should get some rest before tomorrow's departure." "Good night, Eleanor." "Good night, Vanessa." As she turned to go, I found myself speaking again. "Vanessa?" She paused, looking back questioningly. "I'm beginning to believe people can change," I said quietly. "That we're not permanently defined by our worst moments or our deepest mistakes." A smile touched her lips. Not the practiced, perfect smile of the high school queen bee, but something more genuine and therefore more beautiful. "That might be the most hopeful thing I've ever heard you say." After she left, I remained on the porch, contemplating the strange journey that had brought us to this point. From high school nemesis to boss and employee to what exactly? Not friends, certainly, but perhaps something more complex and potentially more meaningful. Two people witnessing each other's growth and redemption in real time. The retreat marked a subtle but significant shift in my relationship with Vanessa. Upon returning to the office, our professional interactions maintained their efficiency, but acquired a layer of authentic respect that hadn't been present before. Small changes appeared in our daily patterns, morning check-ins that sometimes wandered into personal territory, lunch meetings that occasionally extended beyond their scheduled time, collaborative projects approached with genuine intellectual engagement rather than cautious professionalism. These changes did not go unnoticed by the rest of the team. I overheard snippets of conversation in the break room one afternoon, speculation about the apparent thawing between the company founder and the marketing director. "They actually seem to like working together now," one account manager remarked to another. "Remember how tense it was when she first started? Ellie must have finally seen what the rest of us have, that Vanessa's actually pretty brilliant at her job," came the reply. If they only knew the complex history behind that tension, I thought as I continued past the break room, smiling slightly at the simplistic interpretation of our dynamic. November brought new challenges as we implemented the strategic directions established during the retreat. Vanessa's department took the lead on repositioning 3 major clients toward sustainability messaging, an initiative she approached with both creativity and analytical rigor. I found myself genuinely impressed by her strategic thinking, separate from any personal considerations. "The preliminary results from the Drummond campaign are exceeding projections," she reported during one of our weekly meetings, her enthusiasm evident as she walked me through the metrics. Engagement is up 23% among the target demographic, and conversion rates have improved by nearly 18%. That's remarkable, I acknowledged, reviewing the data she'd presented, especially considering the limited budget they allocated for the repositioning. We've been extremely efficient with resource allocation, she explained, pulling up additional slides that detailed the media strategy. By focusing on micro-targeted digital channels rather than traditional broad-reach approaches, we've maximized impact while minimizing spend. As she continued her presentation, I found myself observing not just the content, but the person delivering it. The Vanessa sitting across from me now was fundamentally different from both the teenager who had tormented me and the polished but desperate job applicant who had first walked into my office. This Vanessa combined professional confidence with authentic engagement, passionate about the work itself rather than just the status it conferred. "What?" she asked, noticing my thoughtful gaze. "Nothing," I said. "Just appreciating good work when I see it." A pleased smile touched her lips. "Thank you." As the meeting concluded and Vanessa gathered her materials, I made an impulsive decision. "Are you free for lunch tomorrow? I'd like to discuss some ideas for expanding this approach to other clients." She looked momentarily surprised by the invitation, our first that wasn't directly tied to an immediate work necessity, but quickly nodded. "Absolutely. I'd like that." Lunch the following day at a small Italian restaurant near the office began as a professional discussion, but gradually evolved into something more personal. We talked about industry trends, client expectations, and competitive pressures, but also books we'd recently read, documentaries that had captured our interest, and perspectives on current events. It was perhaps the most normal interaction we'd ever had, two colleagues with shared professional interests enjoying thoughtful conversation. "May I ask you something personal?" Vanessa said as we finished our meals. I nodded, curious about her question. "Do you ever attend the Westlake reunions?" The question caught me off guard. "No, never have, never will." She nodded as though this confirmed a suspicion. "I went to the 5-year. It was," she searched for the right word, "illuminating. Everyone trying so hard to prove they'd become exactly who they always claimed they would be." "And had they?" I asked, genuinely curious. "Some. Most were just performing slightly more adult versions of their teenage selves." She took a sip of water. "I left early, made excuses about an early flight. Couldn't bear to keep pretending I was still that person. And the 10-year? That would have been what, 2 years ago? I didn't go." She met my gaze directly. By then, I knew how hollow that life had been, how much damage I'd done pursuing it. I couldn't face everyone knowing what I now understood about myself. Her candor was disarming. "Did anyone reach out afterward? Old friends wondering why you weren't there?" "A few texts, mostly from people who wanted to make sure their own attendance hadn't been wasted by missing the appearance of the former Queen Bee." She gave a small, sad smile. "Not real connection, just social accounting." I nodded, understanding exactly what she meant. "High school never really ends for some people." "No," she agreed. "But it can for us, can it?" "End, I mean." The question held layers of meaning, about our shared past, our current professional relationship, the possibility of moving beyond the roles we'd once occupied in each other's stories. "I think it already has," I said after a moment's reflection. "At least it's ending." Her smile, genuine, hopeful, suggested this was exactly what she'd needed to hear. As December approached, bringing with it the usual end-of-year pressures and holiday planning, I found myself facing an unexpected dilemma. The company's annual holiday party was scheduled for the second Friday of the month, a gala event at the Grand Meridian that had become something of a tradition during Morgan Media's rise to prominence. Employees looked forward to it as both a celebration of the year's achievements and an opportunity to interact with colleagues in a festive setting. Under normal circumstances, I enjoyed hosting this event, seeing my team relaxed and celebratory, acknowledging their hard work throughout the year. But this year, the prospect of navigating the complex dynamics with Vanessa in a social setting filled me with uncharacteristic uncertainty. Our professional relationship had evolved into something I hadn't anticipated, a productive partnership based on mutual respect and growing trust. But the holiday party would introduce elements our careful rapprochement hadn't yet encompassed: alcohol, socializing, the blurring of professional boundaries that inevitably occurs at such events. "The final guest list for the holiday party has been confirmed," Sarah informed me one morning. 143 attendees, including staff and plus ones." "Perfect," I said, reviewing the document she'd handed me. "And the seating arrangements?" Executive team at the central tables, department groupings radiating outward, as usual. She hesitated. I seated Vanessa at your table, given her director status. If you'd prefer a different arrangement. No, that's appropriate, I said quickly, perhaps too quickly. Maintain the usual protocol. Sarah nodded, but her expression suggested she'd noticed something in my tone. Is everything all right between you two? There seemed to be some tension early on, but lately... Everything's fine, I assured her. Professional differences that have been resolved. It wasn't a lie exactly, but it was certainly an oversimplification. How could I possibly explain the Byzantine emotional landscape Vanessa and I navigated daily? The complex dance of past wounds and present collaboration, historical grievances and emerging respect. The week before the holiday party brought unexpected complications. A major potential client, Zenith Technologies, requested a pitch meeting that would require extensive preparation during what was already a hectic period. As marketing director, Vanessa would need to take the lead on developing the pitch strategy. We can postpone until after the holidays, I suggested during our strategy meeting. January would give us more time to prepare a comprehensive approach. Vanessa shook her head. Their CMO specifically mentioned they're making a decision before year-end for budgeting purposes. If we push to January, we're effectively removing ourselves from consideration. So, we're looking at developing a complete pitch within 10 days, during the busiest period of the year. Yes, she confirmed. It's not ideal timing, but Zenith would be a transformative account for us. Their business would increase our technology sector revenue by nearly 30%. I considered the options, weighing the strain on the team against the potential reward. All right. If you think we can deliver a winning pitch on this timeline, I'll support it. Thank you, she said, her expression determined. I'll start assembling the team today. The next week became a blur of activity as the Zenith pitch preparation overlapped with year-end reporting and holiday party planning. Vanessa threw herself into the pitch development with characteristic thoroughness, working long hours and rallying her team around the opportunity despite the challenging timing. I found myself impressed yet again by her leadership approach, demanding excellence without being draconian, inspiring commitment through genuine enthusiasm rather than pressure. It was leadership by example rather than authority, a style that seemed to bring out the best in her team despite the stressful circumstances. The night before the holiday party, I worked late, finalizing my remarks for the event while simultaneously reviewing Vanessa's preliminary pitch strategy for Zenith. The office was quiet, most employees having departed early to prepare for tomorrow's festivities. A knock at my door drew my attention. Vanessa stood in the doorway looking exhausted but satisfied, a folder in her hands. The completed Zenith strategy, she said, stepping into my office. Ready for your review before we start developing the actual presentation materials. You finished it already? I asked, surprised. I wasn't expecting this until tomorrow. She shrugged, placing the folder on my desk. The team pulled together remarkably well, and I wanted to ensure you had time to review it thoroughly before we proceed further. I opened the folder, scanning the executive summary. This looks incredibly comprehensive given the time frame. We think it's the right approach, she said, taking a seat across from me. Bold but grounded in market realities, exactly what Zenith needs as they navigate their expansion. As I continued reviewing the document, I was struck by the quality of thinking it represented: strategic, innovative, tailored to the client's specific challenges. This wasn't just competent work, it was exceptional. This is excellent, Vanessa, I said, looking up from the pages. You and your team have outdone yourselves. Relief and pride mingled in her expression. Thank you. That means a lot coming from you. There was a moment of companionable silence as I continued reviewing the strategy document. Vanessa remained seated, though she'd technically delivered what she'd come for. Are you ready for tomorrow night? She asked finally. I looked up, momentarily confused. The Zenith presentation? The holiday party, she clarified with a small smile. Oh, of course. I set down the document. Yes, everything's arranged. Sarah has confirmed all the details with the venue. I meant personally, Vanessa said. Are you comfortable with us attending the same social event? It's different from the retreat. More public, more eyes-watching interactions. Her consideration for the potential awkwardness touched me. I think we've established we can manage professional social settings. Absolutely, she agreed quickly. I just wanted to check if there were any boundaries you'd prefer I observe. Ways to make the evening more comfortable for you. I studied her face, searching for any hint of manipulation in this offer. I found none, just genuine consideration for a complex social dynamic. Just be yourself, I said finally. The self you are now, not the self you were then. She nodded, understanding the distinction immediately. I can do that. As she rose to leave, another thought occurred to me. Vanessa? Are you bringing a +1 tomorrow night? The question was more personal than I'd intended, but it had emerged before I could consider its appropriateness. No, she replied, seeming unperturbed by the inquiry. I'm not currently seeing anyone. She paused at the door. Are you? No, I admitted. Work has been my primary relationship for some time now. A smile touched her lips. Something else we have in common, it seems. She gestured to the Zenith document. Let me know if you have any feedback on the strategy. Otherwise, I'll see you tomorrow night. After she left, I sat contemplating our exchange. It had been comfortable, almost friendly, a far cry from the tense, wary interactions that had characterized our early months working together. Something had shifted between us, evolving from professional tolerance to genuine respect, perhaps even the beginnings of actual connection. The holiday party the following evening was a spectacular affair. The Grand Meridian's ballroom had been transformed with elegant decorations, twinkling lights, and tasteful holiday accents. Staff members arrived in formal attire, the usual office hierarchies temporarily suspended in favor of festive camaraderie. I greeted guests near the entrance, accepting warm wishes for the season and congratulations on the company's successful year. From this vantage point, I observed Vanessa's arrival, elegant in a deep burgundy dress that managed to be both festive and sophisticated, her hair styled in loose waves rather than her usual sleek office look. She moved through the room with social grace, greeting colleagues warmly but not dominating conversations, including junior staff members in discussions, rather than focusing exclusively on those with status or influence. It was a subtle but significant departure from the social tactics of her youth. Dinner was served at round tables throughout the ballroom, the executive team seated together at the central table as was tradition. Vanessa took her assigned seat beside Marcus, directly across from me. Throughout the meal, she participated actively in conversations, laughed genuinely at colleagues' jokes, and demonstrated a warmth I wouldn't have associated with the Vanessa of my memories. After dinner came my traditional year-end address, acknowledging the company's achievements, thanking the team for their contributions, and offering a vision for the coming year. As I spoke from the small stage at the front of the ballroom, I found my gaze repeatedly drawn to Vanessa, who listened with evident engagement, nodding at key points and smiling encouragingly. In conclusion, I said, wrapping up my remarks, Morgan Media's success has never been about any one person. It's about the collective talent, creativity, and determination of everyone in this room. As we close this remarkable year and look toward the next, I'm profoundly grateful to lead such an exceptional team. Thank you all, and enjoy the rest of the evening. Applause filled the ballroom as I stepped away from the podium. As waitstaff circulated with champagne for the traditional toast, I made my way back to our table, accepting congratulations and well wishes from staff members along the way. Beautiful speech, Vanessa said as I rejoined the table, especially the emphasis on collective achievement rather than individual success. Thank you, I replied, accepting a glass of champagne from a passing server. It happens to be true. No one builds something meaningful entirely alone. Marcus raised his glass. To Eleanor and Morgan Media, past successes and future triumphs. Hear, hear, came the response from around the table as glasses clinked together. As the formal dinner concluded and the evening transitioned to dancing and more relaxed socializing, I found myself moving throughout the room, checking in with various team members, accepting their thanks for the evening, and generally fulfilling my role as company founder and host. I was speaking with a group from the creative department when I noticed Vanessa standing alone near one of the tall windows that lined the ballroom, looking out at the snow that had begun falling over the city. Something in her posture, a slight withdrawal from the celebration around her, caught my attention. Excusing myself from the conversation, I made my way toward her, picking up 2 glasses of champagne from a passing server. Taking a break from the festivities? I asked, offering her one of the glasses. She turned, a small smile touching her lips as she accepted the champagne. Just admiring the snow. First significant snowfall of the season. I joined her at the window, observing the gentle flakes illuminated by the hotel's exterior lighting. It's beautiful. Yes, she agreed softly. Makes everything look fresh and new. We stood in companionable silence for a moment, watching the snow accumulate on ledges and railings outside. "May I ask you something?" I said finally. She turned slightly toward me, her expression open. "Of course. Are you happy here? At Morgan Media?" The question seemed to surprise her. "Yes," she said after a thoughtful pause. "More than I expected to be, honestly. The work is challenging in the best ways, the team is exceptional, and the company culture values substance over appearance." She took a sip of champagne. "Why do you ask?" I considered my response carefully. "I've been watching you over the past few months, not just your work performance, which has been excellent, but how you interact with the team, how you approach challenges, how you've integrated into the company. And," she prompted when I paused, "and I've been trying to reconcile the person I see now with the person I remember. Trying to determine whether the changes I've observed are genuine evolution or sophisticated performance." Her gaze remained steady, accepting this scrutiny without defensiveness. "What have you concluded?" "That people can change more fundamentally than I previously believed possible," I said honestly. "That you have changed." Something like relief softened her features. "That means more than I can adequately express." Music from the dance floor swelled as the band transitioned to a new song. Around us, the party continued in full swing, colleagues laughing, dancing, enjoying the celebration of another successful year. "I should circulate," I said, aware of my responsibilities as host. "Make sure everyone's enjoying themselves." Vanessa nodded. "Of course. Thank you for checking on me." As I turned to go, she spoke again. "Eleanor?" I looked back questioningly. "I know we can never erase the past," she said, her voice soft but clear despite the surrounding noise. "But I'm deeply grateful for this present, for the opportunity to work with you, to learn from you, to perhaps show you who I'm capable of becoming." The sincerity in her expression was unmistakable, touching something deep within me that had remained guarded despite our evolving relationship. "So am I," I replied, surprised by how genuinely I meant it. Our eyes held for a moment longer than professionally necessary, an unspoken acknowledgement passing between us. Then I moved away, returning to my duties as host, while Vanessa rejoined a group of her team members near the bar. For the remainder of the evening, I found myself aware of her presence throughout the room, not with the wary vigilance of our early months working together, but with something more complex. A consciousness of her movements that felt almost like connection rather than caution. As the party began winding down near midnight, staff members gradually departed in small groups, thanking me for the evening as they left. I stood near the main doors, accepting their good wishes and returning holiday greetings, watching as my team, my company, celebrated not just professional success, but genuine camaraderie. Vanessa approached as the crowd thinned, her coat draped over her arm. "Thank you for a lovely evening," she said. "The party was wonderful." "I'm glad you enjoyed it," I replied. "Are you heading home?" She nodded. "I have an early strategy session with the Zenith team tomorrow." She hesitated, then added, "Unless you need help with anything here before I go?" "No, everything's well in hand." I glanced around at the now sparse ballroom. "The venue staff will handle the rest." She nodded, slipping into her coat. "Good night then, Eleanor. Happy holidays." "Vanessa," I called as she turned to leave. She looked back questioningly. "The Zenith strategy is exceptional work. Regardless of whether we win the account, I want you to know that." A genuine smile warmed her features. "Thank you. That means a lot." After she left, I remained at the party until the last guests departed, then thanked the venue staff and collected my own coat. Outside, the snow had accumulated into a picturesque blanket covering the city streets. I stood for a moment on the hotel steps, breathing in the cold, clean air, reflecting on the evening and all that had transpired over the past months. 10 years ago, if someone had told me I would willingly employ Vanessa Mitchell, let alone develop something approaching respect for her, I would have dismissed the idea as absurd. Yet here we were, our shared history transforming into something neither of us could have anticipated. I hailed a taxi and directed the driver to my apartment, watching the snow-covered city pass by outside the window. The coming weeks would bring new challenges: the Zenith pitch, year-end reporting, strategic planning for the new year. But for the first time since Vanessa had walked into my office months ago, I found myself looking forward to these challenges without the complicating undercurrent of revenge or resentment. Perhaps this was the true revenge, not destroying my former tormentor, but witnessing her evolution into someone worthy of professional respect. not holding her perpetually accountable for her worst self, but allowing her the space to become her best self. Or perhaps revenge had ceased to be the point entirely. Perhaps what mattered now was not our past, but our future. Not who we had been to each other, but who we might become together. The taxi pulled up outside my building, the driver's voice pulling me from my reflections. As I paid the fare and stepped out into the gently falling snow, I felt lighter than I had in months, perhaps years. The burden of old wounds and long-held grievances seemed to lift slightly, like snow melting in gentle sunlight. 10 years ago, Vanessa Mitchell had been the high school queen bee who made my life hell. Now she was my marketing director, a valued colleague, and potentially something I had never imagined possible. Proof that people could change, that wounds could heal, that the worst chapters of our stories didn't have to define the entire narrative. The future remained unwritten, our professional relationship still evolving. But as I entered my building, brushing snow from my coat, I found myself genuinely curious about what that future might hold. Not with dread or calculation, but with something that felt unexpectedly like hope. The Zenith pitch consumed the days leading up to Christmas. Vanessa's team worked tirelessly, transforming their strategic framework into a compelling presentation that showcased Morgan Media's capabilities while addressing Zenith's specific challenges. I provided guidance where needed but largely allowed Vanessa to lead, curious to see how she would handle this high-stakes opportunity. "I think we're ready," she said during our final review meeting, the afternoon before the presentation. "The team has developed a truly innovative approach to Zenith's market expansion challenges." I nodded, reviewing the slides one last time. "The positioning is excellent, particularly the emphasis on integrated digital solutions rather than traditional channel-specific approaches." "That was Alexander's insight," Vanessa acknowledged, referencing one of her junior team members. "He identified the gap in how Zenith's competitors are approaching the education sector. Her willingness to credit team members for their contributions, especially junior staff, continued to impress me. The Vanessa Mitchell of Westlake High had claimed credit indiscriminately, elevating herself by diminishing others. This Vanessa seemed genuinely committed to recognizing excellence wherever she found it. "Who will be presenting tomorrow?" I asked, closing the presentation file. "Myself, Alexander for the digital strategy components, and Jennifer for the creative direction." She hesitated, then asked, "Will you be joining us?" I considered the question carefully. Typically, I attended major pitches, lending the weight of my position as founder to the proceedings. But there was value in allowing Vanessa to lead independently, demonstrating my confidence in her capabilities. "No," I decided. "This is your pitch. You've developed the strategy. You should present it without my presence potentially overshadowing your team's work." Surprise flickered across her face, followed by what appeared to be genuine appreciation. "Thank you for the trust. We won't let you down." "I know you won't," I replied, surprised by my own certainty on this point. The Zenith presentation was scheduled for the following afternoon, leaving the morning free for final preparations. I deliberately stayed away from the conference room where Vanessa and her team were conducting last-minute reviews, resisting the urge to check in or offer additional guidance. This was her moment to succeed or fail on her own merits. At precisely 4:37 p.m., I noted the time specifically, my phone rang. Vanessa's name appeared on the screen. "How did it go?" I asked without preamble. Her voice came through vibrant with excitement. "We got it! Zenith just signed the initial agreement right here in the conference room." Relief and pride washed over me in equal measure. "Congratulations, Vanessa, to you and the entire team." They specifically praised the integrated approach, she continued, her words tumbling out quickly. "Said it demonstrated a deeper understanding of their challenges than any other agency they'd met with." "That's fantastic news," I said, genuinely pleased by this confirmation of what I'd already observed, that Vanessa's strategic thinking was exceptional when freed from the toxic status-seeking of her past. "We should celebrate this properly. The team is heading to Westfields for drinks," she replied. "Would you like to join us?" The invitation caught me slightly off guard. While our professional relationship had evolved significantly, we hadn't yet socialized outside of official company functions. This would represent another shift in our dynamic. "I'd like that," I said after a brief hesitation. "I'll meet you there in 30 minutes. Westfield's was a upscale bar near our office, popular with the advertising and marketing crowd. When I arrived, Vanessa and her team had already secured a corner section, champagne bottles and glasses covering the table. Their excitement was palpable, the atmosphere charged with the particular energy that accompanies a significant win. "Eleanor," Alexander called, spotting me first. "We did it!" The team made space for me, Vanessa sliding over on the banquette to allow me to sit beside her. A glass of champagne appeared in front of me almost immediately. "To the Zenith team," I said, raising my glass. "An exceptional strategy exceptionally executed." "And to Vanessa," Jennifer added, surprising me with her enthusiastic support of the woman she had once viewed with suspicion, "who led us brilliantly through this pitch." Vanessa looked momentarily embarrassed by the direct praise. "It was truly a team effort," she deflected, raising her own glass. "To all of us, and to Eleanor for trusting us with this opportunity." The celebration continued, the conversation flowing easily between professional discussion of the pitch and more personal topics. I observed Vanessa's interactions with her team with interest, noting the easy rapport she had developed with people who had once been wary of her. She listened more than she spoke, laughed genuinely at others' jokes, and demonstrated a warmth that seemed entirely authentic. "You've built a strong team," I commented quietly during a moment when the others were engaged in a separate conversation. She nodded, her expression thoughtful. "They're exceptional people. I'm lucky to work with them." "Luck has little to do with it," I countered. "You've earned their respect through consistent leadership." A smile touched her lips. "That means a lot coming from you." The evening progressed, team members gradually departing until only Vanessa and I remained, sharing a final glass of champagne at the now quiet table. "This was a significant win," I said, swirling the remaining champagne in my glass. "Zenith will transform our technology sector portfolio." "Yes," she agreed. "But beyond the revenue implications, it positions us as a true competitor for enterprise-level technology clients. The market perception shift alone is valuable." I nodded, appreciating her strategic perspective that looked beyond immediate gains to longer-term positioning. "What do you think was the deciding factor for them?" She considered the question carefully. "I think they recognized that we truly understood their challenges, not just their marketing challenges, but their business challenges. Our approach demonstrated that we view ourselves as business partners, not just service providers." "That's insightful," I acknowledged, "and exactly the positioning I've tried to establish for Morgan Media since the beginning." "I know," she said with a small smile. "It's one of the reasons I was so eager to join the company even before," she hesitated, "before I knew our connection." The reference to our shared past hung briefly in the air between us, but without the tension that would have accompanied it months earlier. "Speaking of connections," I said, deciding to address something I'd been curious about, "I've noticed you and Jennifer seem to have developed a good working relationship. That's quite a shift from her initial wariness." Vanessa nodded, acknowledging the observation. "It took time and consistency. She was rightfully protective of you, given what she knew of our history." "What changed?" "I think the Levinson pitch was the turning point," she replied. "When her concept faced criticism, and I defended the core idea while helping refine the execution, she realized I wasn't the same person you'd described from high school." The honesty of her assessment was disarming. There was no defensiveness, no attempt to minimize her past behavior or my sharing of it with Jennifer, just a straightforward recognition of the reality we'd all navigated. "You aren't the same person," I agreed quietly. "That's become increasingly clear." She met my gaze directly, her expression open and vulnerable in a way the teenage Vanessa would never have permitted. "Neither are you. The Eleanor I knew in high school was brilliant but unsure of her own worth. The woman sitting across from me now knows exactly who she is and what she's capable of." The observation was unexpectedly affecting, not just for its accuracy, but for what it revealed about Vanessa's perception of me both then and now. "We've both changed," I acknowledged. "Grown, evolved, learned from our experiences. Some more painfully than others," she said with a hint of sadness. "I'm still sorry for the pain I caused you." "I know," I replied simply. "And I believe you." Those 4 words, "and I believe you," seemed to affect her deeply. Her eyes glistened briefly before she blinked and composed herself. "It's getting late," she said, glancing at her watch. "I should probably head home." Outside the bar, the December night was cold and clear, the earlier snow having given way to starry skies. We stood for a moment on the sidewalk, our breath forming small clouds in the chilled air. "I can drop you home," I offered, gesturing to where my driver waited with the company car. "It's on my way." She hesitated only briefly before accepting. "Thank you. That would be nice." In the quiet interior of the car, watching the city lights pass by outside the window, a comfortable silence settled between us, the kind of silence possible only between people who have moved beyond the need for constant verbal negotiation of their relationship. "This has been quite a year," Vanessa observed as we approached her neighborhood. "For both of us." "Indeed it has," I agreed. "Not at all what I anticipated when your resume first crossed my desk." A small smile touched her lips. "Life rarely follows our scripts, does it?" "Thankfully not," I replied. My original script for our professional relationship was far less productive than what actually developed. The car pulled up outside her building, a modern mid-rise in a recently revitalized neighborhood, modest but well-appointed. She gathered her coat and bag, then turned to me before opening the door. "Thank you, Eleanor. Not just for the ride, but for everything. The second chance, the space to prove myself, the willingness to see me as I am now rather than only as I was then." "Thank you for making that second chance worthwhile," I replied honestly. After she exited the car, I watched her enter her building, struck by how completely my feelings toward her had transformed over the past months. Where once I had seen only an opportunity for revenge, I now saw a talented colleague whose growth I had witnessed firsthand. The satisfaction I had once anticipated from her professional humiliation had been replaced by the deeper, more meaningful satisfaction of seeing genuine redemption unfold. The car pulled away, continuing toward my own apartment. As we drove through the quiet nighttime streets, I contemplated the strange journey that had brought us to this point. Vanessa Mitchell, my high school tormentor, had become one of my most valued executives. More surprisingly, she had become someone I genuinely respected, not despite our history, but in some ways because of it. Her willingness to acknowledge her past failings while working consistently to become better demonstrated a courage I hadn't initially credited her with possessing. When I'd hired her, I'd been seeking retribution for past wounds. What I'd found instead was something far more valuable, evidence that people could change in fundamental ways, that the roles we occupied in each other's stories weren't permanently fixed, that reconciliation was possible even after profound hurt. It wasn't the ending I had planned when I first recognized her name on that job application. It was better, more complex, more authentic, and ultimately more healing for both of us. The Christmas holiday provided a welcome respite from the office, a chance to reflect on the remarkable year that was ending and the possibilities of the one about to begin. I spent the time quietly, visiting my mother for Christmas Day, but otherwise enjoying the solitude of my apartment, catching up on reading and taking long walks through the snow-covered city parks. On New Year's Eve, I hosted a small gathering at my apartment for a few close friends. Nothing elaborate, just good food, better wine, and conversation that stretched long into the night. As midnight approached and we prepared to toast the new year, my phone chimed with an incoming text. Vanessa's name appeared on the screen. "Wishing you a beautiful start to the new year. Thank you for making the end of this one better than I deserved. Looking forward to what we'll build together in the coming months." I smiled at the simple message, touched by its sincerity and the subtle acknowledgement of our complex journey. As my friends counted down the final seconds of the year, I typed a reply, "Happy New Year, Vanessa. Here's to new beginnings and the people we're becoming." The first working day of January brought fresh energy to the office. Staff members returned from the holiday break with renewed focus, and the successful acquisition of the Zenith account created momentum for ambitious planning. "I've been thinking about our departmental structure," I told Vanessa during our first meeting of the new year. "With the Zenith account and the expansion we're anticipating, we need to consider some organizational changes." She nodded, immediately engaged with the strategic implications. "I've been having similar thoughts. The current structure worked well for our size last year, but we're outgrowing it rapidly." We spent the next hour discussing potential reorganization options, our conversation flowing easily between big-picture vision and practical implementation details. The professional rapport we'd developed allowed for productive disagreement without tension, challenging each other's assumptions while building toward shared conclusions. "I think we've got a solid framework to present to the executive team," I said as our meeting concluded. "Would you be willing to draft the initial proposal for review?" "Absolutely," she agreed. "I can have something to you by the end of the week." As she gathered her notes, a thought occurred to me. "Vanessa?" She looked up questioningly. How would you feel about taking on a broader role in the company? Something like Chief Strategy Officer, overseeing not just marketing but our overall business development direction. Surprise registered on her face, followed by what appeared to be genuine pleasure at the suggestion. I'd be honored to be considered for such a role. It's more than consideration, I clarified. I'm formally offering you the position, pending board approval of the reorganization plan. She set her notebook down, giving the moment her full attention. May I ask what prompted this? It was a fair question, one that deserved a thoughtful response. Your work over the past 6 months has consistently demonstrated strategic thinking that extends beyond marketing into broader business development. The Zenith acquisition is just the most recent example. I paused, then added, and on a personal level, I've come to trust your judgment and your commitment to the company's success. Thank you, she said, her voice reflecting the significance of that trust given our history. I would love to take on this challenge. Good, I smiled. We'll discuss the details once the board approves the reorganization. The subsequent weeks brought a flurry of activity as we prepared and then implemented the company restructuring. Vanessa worked tirelessly on the transition, developing comprehensive plans for her expanded role while ensuring her marketing department responsibilities were properly redistributed. Her promotion to Chief Strategy Officer was announced to the company in early February, met with general approval from staff who had witnessed her contributions to recent successes. Jennifer, now elevated to Marketing Director, stopped by my office the day after the announcement. I have to admit, she said, leaning against my doorframe, when you first hired Vanessa, I thought you were making a huge mistake. I looked up from my computer, based on what I'd told you about high school. She nodded. I couldn't imagine why you'd want to work with someone who had treated you so badly. But watching her these past months, she shook her head slightly. People really can change, can't they? Some people, I agreed, when they recognize the need to and commit to the work involved. Well, I'm glad to be wrong in this case. She's earned this promotion. After Jennifer left, I found myself reflecting on her observation. People really can change. It was a simple statement that contained profound implications, not just for Vanessa, but for me as well. I had changed too, evolving from someone seeking revenge to someone capable of recognizing and appreciating genuine growth in others. The reorganization created new dynamics within the company, with Vanessa now having a more direct role in shaping overall business strategy. We worked closely together, our complementary perspectives strengthening decisions across multiple departments. Where I tended toward cautious analysis, she often saw opportunities for bold moves. Where she might have pushed too aggressively, I provided stabilizing perspective. Together, we developed a balanced approach that served the company well. The Zenith implementation is exceeding initial projections. Vanessa reported during one of our strategy meetings in late March. Their CMO specifically mentioned that our integrated approach has already delivered measurable improvements in customer acquisition costs. That's excellent news, I replied, reviewing the metrics she'd presented. And perfect timing with the Harrington pitch coming up next month. Exactly. We can leverage the Zenith results as proof of concept for the approach we're recommending to Harrington. Our professional collaboration had reached a level of ease and productivity I wouldn't have thought possible when she first walked into my office. We challenged each other intellectually, complemented each other's strengths, and had developed a shorthand communication that streamlined decision-making. By any objective measure, bringing Vanessa Mitchell into Morgan Media had proven to be one of my most successful hiring decisions. Yet beneath this professional success lay the more complex personal dimension of our relationship, the ongoing navigation of a shared past that neither of us could entirely forget. While we had established a productive working relationship built on mutual respect, certain boundaries remained firmly in place. We didn't socialize outside of work events. Personal topics were largely avoided in our conversations. The unspoken agreement seemed to be that our professional present was separate from our high school past, connected but compartmentalized. This careful separation was tested in early April, when an unexpected email appeared in my inbox. The subject line read simply, "Westlake High 15-year reunion." I stared at the message for a long moment before opening it, already knowing its contents. The 15th anniversary of our graduation was approaching in June, and the reunion committee was beginning its outreach to the class of 2011. The email was generic, enthusiastic text about reconnecting with former classmates, details about the venue and schedule, links for registration and hotel booking. Nothing personal or specifically triggering. Yet, reading it transported me immediately back to those hallways, those classrooms, those painful social dynamics that had shaped so much of my adolescent experience. I was about to delete the message when my office door opened and Vanessa appeared, tablet in hand. "Do you have a minute to discuss the Q2 forecast adjustments?" she asked, then paused, clearly noting something in my expression. "Is everything all right?" I gestured to my computer screen. "Just received the Westlake reunion invitation." Understanding immediately crossed her face. "Ah, I got mine yesterday." "You did?" I was surprised she'd mention it so casually. She nodded, entering my office and taking a seat. 15 years. Hard to believe it's been that long. "Are you planning to attend?" I asked, curious despite myself. She considered the question seriously. "I don't think so." She met my gaze directly. "The person they're expecting to see, the queen bee, the social center, that's not who I am anymore. And I'm not interested in pretending to be her for an evening of nostalgic performance." Her answer resonated with my own feelings about the event. "I've never attended any of the reunions," I admitted. "Never saw the appeal of revisiting that time in my life." "Understandably," she acknowledged. Then, after a brief hesitation, "Would it be easier if you knew I definitely wouldn't be there?" The question caught me off guard with its directness and consideration. "That's not—" I began, then stopped, reconsidering. "Actually, yes. It probably would." She nodded, accepting this honest answer without offense. "Then consider me officially not attending. I'll send my regrets to the committee today. You don't have to make that decision based on my comfort," I said, feeling suddenly uncomfortable with the dynamic. "That's not a reasonable expectation." "It's not just about your comfort," she replied thoughtfully. "As I said, I have my own reasons for not wanting to attend. But knowing it makes things easier for you is an added benefit I'm happy to provide." She smiled slightly. "Consider it a very small installment in a very large karmic debt." The conversation shifted then to the forecast adjustments she'd come to discuss, our professional focus reasserting itself. But later, after she'd left my office, I found myself reflecting on the exchange. There had been something genuinely considerate in her offer, an acknowledgement of my feelings that didn't demand reciprocal vulnerability or emotional processing. I deleted the reunion email without responding, as I had done with all previous invitations. Whatever closure or healing I needed wouldn't be found in a school gymnasium surrounded by people who had largely been indifferent to my teenage suffering. It would come, if it came at all, through the life I had built and continued to build, a life that now, surprisingly, included a transformed version of the person who had once caused me so much pain. The following week brought a development I hadn't anticipated. David Chen, my almost prom date from senior year, reached out via LinkedIn with a brief professional message expressing interest in Morgan Media's services for his technology startup. Seeing his name in my inbox triggered a cascade of memories. His shy invitation to prom, my excited preparation, the crushing humiliation when Vanessa revealed it had all been a cruel bet. I hadn't spoken to or thought much about David in years, having categorized him simply as another participant in my high school humiliation. His message gave no indication that he remembered our personal history, framed entirely in professional terms about his company's marketing needs. After consideration, I referred the inquiry to Jennifer as our new marketing director, with a brief note explaining that while we would be happy to explore working with his company, I would not be personally involved in the account. I didn't mention the inquiry to Vanessa, seeing no professional reason to do so. However, the universe had other plans for surfacing this particular piece of our shared past. "Eleanor," Sarah called through the intercom one afternoon in late April. "Jennifer is here with David Chen from Tech Fusion. She says you requested a brief introduction before their meeting." I most certainly had not made any such request, but before I could clarify this, my office door opened and Jennifer appeared with David in tow. He looked essentially the same as he had in high school, though the intervening years had added maturity to his features and confidence to his bearing. "Eleanor Morgan," he said, genuine surprise evident in his voice as he extended his hand. "I had no idea this was your company. It's been, 15 years?" "Approximately," I confirmed, shaking his hand briefly. "Welcome to Morgan Media, Mr. Chen. Jennifer will take excellent care of your marketing needs." "Thank you," he replied, clearly sensing my professional distance. "I look forward to working with your team." Jennifer, looking slightly confused by the chilly interaction, led him out to continue their scheduled meeting. I returned to my work, pushing aside the unexpected emotions his appearance had triggered. Less than an hour later, Vanessa appeared in my doorway, her expression concerned. Jennifer mentioned David Chen is here as a potential client. I nodded, not looking up from my computer. His startup needs marketing support. She entered my office fully, closing the door behind her. Eleanor, if his presence here makes you uncomfortable given what happened, I can ensure he works with a different agency. We have several trusted partners I could refer him to. The offer caught me off guard with its directness and consideration. I finally looked up, meeting her concerned gaze. That's not necessary. Are you sure? Because it would be a simple matter to— I'm sure, I interrupted gently. David Chen was a pawn in your game, not its architect. He doesn't warrant special consideration one way or another. She absorbed this assessment with a thoughtful nod. That's a fair perspective. Still, if you change your mind, I'll let you know, I assured her. But truly, it's fine. Jennifer will handle his account if we decide to take it on. After she left, I found myself reflecting on the interaction. Vanessa's immediate concern for my comfort regarding David's presence demonstrated both awareness of our shared history and consideration for its ongoing emotional impact. It was a small moment, but indicative of the person she had become, someone capable of anticipating potential pain points from our past and offering pragmatic solutions to address them. May brought beautiful spring weather and the culmination of several major projects we'd been developing. The office hummed with productive energy, client relationships flourished under our reorganized structure, and Morgan Media's market position continued to strengthen. Professionally, things couldn't have been better. It was against this backdrop of success that an unexpected personal invitation appeared, a simple note card on my desk one morning that read, "Eleanor, would you consider having dinner with me? Not work-related. Just two people with a complicated history having a meal and a conversation. Vanessa." I stared at the card for a long moment, uncertain how to respond. In the months since her arrival at Morgan Media, we had developed a productive professional relationship that occasionally verged on friendship. But we had maintained an unspoken boundary between our work interactions and anything more personal. This invitation represented a deliberate step across that boundary. Did I want that? Was I ready to engage with Vanessa Mitchell not as my CSO, but as a person with whom I shared a complex, painful history? What would be the purpose of such an encounter? I didn't respond immediately, allowing myself time to consider the implications. Throughout the day, I found my thoughts returning to the invitation and the questions it raised. By evening, I had made my decision. Vanessa was working late, as she often did, when I appeared in her office doorway. She looked up from her computer, her expression shifting to cautious interest when she saw me. "Yes," I said simply. "To dinner." A smile touched her lips, not triumphant or smug, but genuinely pleased. "Thank you. I was thinking Saturday if that works for you. There's a new place in the West End that's supposed to be excellent." "Saturday works," I agreed. "Text me the details." As I turned to leave, she called after me softly, "Eleanor, thank you for being willing to try this." I nodded acknowledgement without turning back, not entirely trusting myself to maintain professional composure if I saw the sincerity I'd heard in her voice reflected in her eyes. Saturday evening arrived with perfect spring weather, mild temperatures, clear skies, the city parks lush with new greenery. I dressed carefully for the dinner, selecting an outfit that balanced casual elegance with a certain protective formality. This wasn't a social engagement I could navigate on autopilot. It required thoughtful presence. The restaurant Vanessa had selected was indeed excellent, a small, sophisticated establishment tucked away on a quiet street, its understated exterior belying the elegant space within. She was already seated when I arrived, rising to greet me with a smile that contained a hint of nervousness I rarely saw in her professional demeanor. "Thank you for coming," she said as we settled at our table, a quiet corner location that afforded privacy without isolation. "I appreciate your willingness to step outside our usual context." I was intrigued by the invitation, I admitted, though I'm not entirely sure what to expect from this evening. "Honest conversation," she replied simply, without the constraints of office dynamics or professional roles. She paused as the server approached to take our drink orders, then continued once we were alone again. "We've developed a working relationship I never thought possible given our history. I find myself wondering if we might also develop, not friendship exactly, but something beyond mere professional collaboration." Her directness was disarming, as always. "Is that something you want?" "Yes," she answered without hesitation. "I've come to respect you deeply, not just as a business leader but as a person. I value your perspective, your intellect, your ethical clarity." She smiled slightly. "And I find I genuinely enjoy your company when we're not both focused exclusively on work objectives." It was perhaps the most straightforward expression of interpersonal interest I'd ever received, neither manipulative nor evasive, simply honest about her perception and desires. "I'm not sure I know how to navigate this," I admitted after our wine had been served and we were alone again. "Our history complicates everything." "It does," she agreed. "But perhaps we could start by acknowledging that complication rather than trying to work around it." She took a sip of her wine, then asked, "May I share something I've never told anyone about high school?" I nodded, curious despite my caution. "I was terrified of you," she said simply. The statement was so unexpected I nearly laughed. "Terrified? Of me? The scholarship student with thrift store clothes and no social standing?" "Of your intelligence," she clarified. "Your authenticity. Your refusal to play the social games the rest of us were trapped in?" She shook her head slightly. "You had something I didn't understand but instinctively recognized as valuable, a sense of self that didn't depend on others' validation. I absorbed this revelation with surprise. That's not how I experienced myself at all." "No, I imagine not. When you're being actively ostracized, it probably doesn't feel like a position of strength." Her expression turned reflective. "But from my perspective, someone whose entire identity was constructed around external validation, your intellectual confidence and genuine interests seemed like freedom I couldn't imagine." It was a perspective shift I hadn't anticipated, the suggestion that beneath her cruelty had been not just insecurity, but something like envy. "So you tormented me because you envied my— what? Authenticity?" The skepticism in my voice was evident. "Partly," she acknowledged, "but mostly because targeting you gave me control over the one person who made me feel inadequate without even trying." She met my gaze directly. "It's not a justification. There is no justification for how I treated you. But it might help explain the particular focus my cruelty took." The conversation paused as our server returned to take our dinner orders. The brief interruption gave me time to process Vanessa's unexpected revelation, to consider how it reframed not just her actions, but my understanding of the dynamics between us. "I've never thought about it from that perspective," I said after the server departed. "In my memories, you were this untouchable figure of social power, completely confident in your superiority. A carefully constructed illusion," she replied. "One I maintained at considerable personal cost." "What changed?" I asked, genuinely curious about her evolution from that person to the woman sitting across from me. "When did you start to recognize the toxicity of those patterns?" She considered the question thoughtfully. "There wasn't a single moment of revelation, more a gradual accumulation of consequences." She took a sip of her wine. "By my late 20s, I'd achieved all the external markers of success I'd been raised to value: prestigious job, beautiful apartment, attractive partner, social status. Yet I was profoundly unhappy, constantly anxious about maintaining those markers, unable to form genuine connections. And that led to self-reflection?" "Eventually," she nodded. "Though it took the professional collapse at Archer and Rome to really force the issue. Losing everything I'd built created space to question how and why I'd built it." She smiled ruefully, nothing like complete failure to inspire philosophical contemplation. The honesty of her self-assessment was disarming. There was no attempt to minimize her past behavior or exaggerate her current growth, just straightforward acknowledgement of both where she had been and how far she had come. Our food arrived, giving us both a moment to shift mental gears. The conversation turned to lighter topics as we ate: books we'd recently read, exhibitions at local museums, observations about the city's changing neighborhoods. It was surprisingly easy, this personal interaction outside the office context. Vanessa was thoughtful, funny, and genuinely interested in my perspectives on topics unrelated to work. "May I ask you something I've been curious about?" she said as we finished our main courses. I nodded, setting down my fork. "Why did you keep me employed after revealing your identity? The revenge would have been so much more complete if you'd built me up only to fire me once I knew who you were." It was a question I'd asked myself many times over the past months. "Partly because you were genuinely good at your job," I answered honestly. "It would have been bad business to lose your talent just to satisfy a personal vendetta. And the other part?" she prompted when I paused. I considered how to articulate the complex emotional calculus that had informed my decision. I think I needed to prove something to myself, that I could be more than the hurt teenager seeking revenge, that I could choose grace even when retribution was fully within my power. She nodded slowly, absorbing this. That's a kind of strength I'm still learning. We're all still learning, I acknowledged, growing into better versions of ourselves, hopefully. As dessert and coffee were served, our conversation continued to flow between personal reflection and more casual topics. There was an ease between us I wouldn't have thought possible given our history. Not friendship exactly, but something adjacent to it. A mutual recognition of each other's humanity that transcended our past roles in each other's stories. When the evening finally drew to a close, we stood outside the restaurant in the gentle spring night, an uncertain moment hovering between us. "Thank you for this evening," Vanessa said, "for being willing to step outside our professional relationship and engage with the more complicated personal dimension." "Thank you for suggesting it," I replied sincerely. "It was illuminating." She smiled, a genuine expression that reached her eyes. "Perhaps we could do it again sometime? Continue this exploration of who we are to each other now, beyond boss and employee, beyond high school adversaries?" I found myself nodding. I'd like that. As I rode home in a taxi later that night, I reflected on the evening and its unexpected outcomes. When Vanessa had first walked back into my life, I had seen only the opportunity for revenge, the chance to inflict on her some measure of the pain she had caused me. I could never have anticipated that 10 months later, I would be contemplating not just a continued professional relationship, but something approaching actual friendship with my former tormentor. Yet here we were, two adults with a painful shared history, finding our way toward a new dynamic based on mutual respect and genuine connection. It wasn't a neat resolution to our complicated past, but perhaps it was something better, a complex, evolving present that honored both the wounds we had experienced and the growth we had achieved. The high school queen bee who had made my life hell was now my chief strategy officer, a valued colleague and potentially, improbably, a friend. 10 years after our paths had diverged, they had reconnected in ways neither of us could have imagined, bringing us both to a place of greater understanding, not just of each other, but of ourselves. It wasn't the ending I had planned when I'd recognized her name on that job application nearly a year ago. It was infinitely more complicated, more challenging, and ultimately more rewarding. A testament not to the power of revenge, but to the possibility of redemption, for both of us.